Chapter 837. The old man was stunned by the little girl's punch as well. What's the meaning of this? All the experts of the sword sect gazed at the little girl in succession. Is she a helper from our sect? She's probably Zhou Xian's helper, right? The old man stared fixedly at the little girl, and he clenched his fists tightly. Aren't you supposed to be protecting my sword sect? He was furious. Extremely furious. That white little fellow had helped Zhou Xian earlier, and now this little girl was helping Zhou Xian as well. What's going on? The little girl glanced at the old man. Why did all of you hit him? Don't all of you know that he's my older brother's subordinate? My older brother's subordinate? The old man frowned slightly. What do you mean? The little girl pointed angrily at the old man. Why did all of you hit him? Hearing this, the black-clothed old man was dumbfounded. Why did we hit Zhou Xian? His mind was completely short-circuited. Is this the trump card that the sword sect's founding ancestor left behind for the sword sect? The experts of the sword sect were in a state of confusion as well. What's going on? Is this the sword sect's helper or Zhou Xian's? Meanwhile, a nearby swordsman stepped forward and he forcefully suppressed the rage in his heart. Didn't you see that? It was he who slaughtered in my sword sect, and it wasn't my sword sect that hit him. The little girl gazed at Zhou Xian. Meanwhile, Xiaoling suddenly appeared in front of the little girl, and she hurriedly told her everything. A short moment later, the little girl glanced at Yiling, and her expression gradually turned cold. After that, she turned around to look at the nearby swordsman. All of you hit his younger sister first. The swordsman's expression was slightly unsightly. Who exactly are you helping? The little girl suddenly stomped her right foot against the ground. Bang! The swordsman's body exploded apart before he could even react. The swordsman's expression changed drastically when they saw this. The little girl glanced coldly at the experts of the sword sect. You actually dared to hit my younger sister? How shameless. Moreover, the people you beat up are my brother's people. The black-clothed old man coldly looked at the little girl. Who is your brother? The little girl pointed at the statue not far away. He's my brother. Seeing this scene, the black-robed old man and the others were stunned. Wasn't this their patriarch? Meanwhile, a swordsman spoke solemnly. That's the founding ancestor of our sword sect. Since he's your elder brother, why don't you help us? The little girl looked at the swordsman. I've calculated your relationship with my brother and his relationship with my brother. I realize that he's closer to my brother, so I'll help him. Everyone, the black-robed old man slowly clenched his fists. You said that he is closer to your brother. Why do you say that? The little girl shrugged. Anyway, they're closer. The black-clothed old man spoke solemnly. He intends to kill us. The little girl said, then let him kill us. The black-clothed old man almost spat out a mouthful of blood when he heard this. Let him kill us? My God. What did I just say? At this moment, the black-clothed old man felt like his brain wasn't enough to comprehend all of this. Suddenly, Zhou Xian, who stood by the little girl's side, gazed at the black-clothed old man. A moment later, he transformed into a ray of light that shot explosively towards the black-clothed old man. The black-clothed old man's expression changed drastically when he witnessed this scene. How could he dare to resist Zhou Xian's attack? He immediately retreated madly. However, Zhou Xian didn't pursue him, and Zhou Xian went after the other experts of the sword sect instead. It didn't take long for numerous shrill cries to resound once more. They couldn't stop Zhou Xian at all. Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian's sword was too terrifying. The little girl blinked, hesitated for a moment and said, why don't we sit down and have a chat? Zhou Xian ignored her and continued killing. The little girl thought for a moment and said, don't injure yourself. As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and walked towards the white little fellow. Zhou Xian was still slaughtering in the distance. While the experts of the sword sect were resisting him, their swords couldn't pose a threat to Zhou Xian at all. Even some of the formidable sword formations of the sword sect were unable to harm Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian was the bane of the swordsman. Or it should be said that he was the bane of the sword sect. If he encountered any other sect, then Zhou Xian would absolutely not slaughter them so wantonly. Because while his combat strength was formidable, the joint forces of 7 or 8 experts at the peak of the Shattering Realm would definitely be able to suppress him. However, the Fate Realm experts of the sword sect felt extremely helpless. They felt extremely helpless, because their swords were useless against Zhou Xian. On the other hand, the little girl had walked over to the white little fellow. The white little fellow pointed at Yi Ling, who was lying on the ground with an excited expression on her face. The little girl looked at Yi Ling and blinked. In next to no time, a wisp of surprise flashed through her eyes. When she noticed the little girl, the white little fellow hurriedly waved her little claws as if she was trying to express something. The little girl nodded slightly. What a unique physique. It's amazing. The white little fellow hurriedly nodded in agreement. The little girl looked at the white little fellow. Give her some more violet energy and completely activate her physique. The white little fellow nodded, and then she continued instilling violet energy into Yi Ling. On the other side, Yi Xian had gone mad from the slaughter. At this moment, Yi Xian was enveloped by countless strands of blood energy, and everywhere he passed, heads would fall to the ground. It was truly a bloodbath. Yi Xian's target was the Sword Sect Sword Hall. In other words, the swordsman's location. However, the Sword Sect's experts were resisting tenaciously, and they were trying to delay until the swordsman came out. The current strongest expert of the Sword Sect. At this moment, a voice suddenly resounded from within the sword hall. Everyone, retreat to the front of the sword hall and activate the defensive sword formation. The voice of the swordsman. Hearing this, all the Sword Sect's experts retreated. When they retreated to the front of the sword hall, a huge barrier of light suddenly enveloped the entire sword hall. This barrier of light wasn't formed by sword energy, which meant that Yi Xian couldn't absorb it at all. In front of the sword hall were the Sword Sect's experts, and there were only a few dozen of them. Outside the sword hall was Yi Xian, and the ground around Yi Xian was covered in blood and corpses. Yi Xian was surrounded by a bloody glow, and the executing heaven sword in his hand was horribly red as if it was forged from blood. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly walked to the barrier of light and slashed down. Bang! The barrier of light shook violently and countless cracks appeared on it. However, it didn't shatter. Yi Xian slashed down again. Rumble! The barrier of light shook once more and the cracks grew larger. However, it still stood firm. Yi Xian was about to attack again when he suddenly transformed into a ray of light that vanished into the distance. The swordsmen were slightly stunned by this scene. What's Yi Xian trying to do? In next to no time, all of them seemed to have thought of something and their expressions changed drastically. One of the swordsmen spoke with horror. His targets are the disciples of our sword sect. He just finished speaking when the howl of swords resounded from afar. The black-clothed old man who led the group roared furiously, Yi Xian. You think you can do that? Come at us. Yi Xian didn't even pay attention to him and he just slaughtered the disciples of the sword sect. How could these disciples of the sword sect be a match for Yi Xian? They couldn't fight back at all. Yi Xian immediately started slaughtering and shrill cries resounded incessantly. On the other hand, the experts of the sword sect who were trapped within the barrier of light had extremely unsightly expressions on their faces. They wanted to leave the barrier, but they were very clearly aware that it would be useless even if they did. Because they couldn't stop Yi Xian. Yi Xian was still slaughtering. At this point he'd killed a few dozen and all of them were genius disciples of the sword sect. Even though they weren't strong enough right now, they were the future hope of the sword sect. At this moment, the black-clothed old man in the light shield suddenly rushed out. The black-clothed old man glared at Yi Xian in the distance. Both of his hands had been chopped off by the little girl, so he had no hands at the moment. However, there was not a hint of fear in the black-robed old man's eyes. The black-clothed old man walked slowly towards Yi Xian. Yi Xian, do you only attack the weak? You. His voice suddenly stopped abruptly. This was because a blood-red sword had been stabbed into his throat at some point in time. It was an instant kill. The black-clothed old man's eyes were filled with disbelief. He intended to say something, but Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of him, and then Yi Xian swung the execution heaven sword horizontally. The black-clothed old man's head flew into the air. After he beheaded the black-clothed old man, Yi Xian transformed into a ray of blood-red light that shot towards the barrier of light. And then he swung his sword down. Bang! The barrier of light shook violently and then countless cracks appeared on it. Yi Xian didn't waste his breath at all. He just swung his sword a few more times in succession, and more cracks appeared on the barrier of light. The expressions of the experts of the sword sect who were trapped within the barrier of light had changed when they witnessed this scene. Once the barrier of light was destroyed, then could anyone stop Yi Xian? No one. Defend the formation. Meanwhile, Jian Mu's voice resounded once more within the hall. The others hurriedly utilized their sword energy to defend the formation when they heard Jian Mu. They didn't dare allow their sword energy to leave the barrier of light because it would be absorbed by Yi Xian if it left the barrier of light. Just like that, Yi Xian continued slashing madly for around 15 minutes. Even though the barrier of light was covered in countless cracks, it still didn't shatter. The members of the sword sect instantly heaved sighs of relief when they witnessed this scene. Right at this moment, the space between Yi Xian's brows suddenly flashed. In the next moment, the space here started to reform layer by layer. The spatial Dao law. Under the influence of the spatial Dao law, the barrier of light actually started to disintegrate bit by bit. The expressions of the experts of the sword sect changed drastically when they witnessed this scene, and they retreated explosively. It didn't take long for the barrier of light to vanish without a trace. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly vanished on the spot. At the instant he vanished, a blood-red ray of light slashed through the air. The swordsman experts who led the group were instantly beheaded. Yi Xian was just about to continue attacking when an invisible pressure suddenly swept out from within the hall. Bang! Yi Xian was instantly blasted back by this aura, and he retreated until he stood before the little girl and the white fellow. An old man walked over from afar. It was none other than Jian Mu. At this moment, Jian Mu had recovered his physical body. Jian Mu walked slowly towards Yi Xian with an extremely gloomy expression on his face. The little girl who stood by Yi Xian's side suddenly gazed at the white fellow. "I'll go help him." As soon as she finished speaking, she stood up. P.S. The weather has suddenly turned cold and it's brightening later than usual. Chapter 838. She walked over to Yi Xian's side, but Yi Xian immediately slashed his sword at her. However, the little girl pressed her hand down on his shoulder, and this action instantly suppressed the energy of his bloodline. However, it was only temporarily suppressed and hadn't been completely suppressed. The little girl gazed at Jian Mu and the latter spoke in a low voice. "Both of you are trump cards left behind by the founding ancestor of my sword sect. Logically speaking, both of you should be protecting my sword sect, right?" The little girl asked. "Why did both of you hit him?" Obviously, she was referring to Yi Xian. Jian Mu gazed at her. "You know him?" The little girl nodded. "I do." Jian Mu's eyes narrowed slightly. "You actually know him? Why?" The little girl was just about to speak when Yi Xian suddenly started trembling, and the energy of his bloodline grew stronger and stronger. The little girl's brows knit together slightly. Meanwhile, Jian Mu said, "How did you know him?" The little girl glanced at Jian Mu. "Let me ask you a question. Did you hit his younger sister?" Jian Mu gazed at her. "Yes." The little girl flared up with rage. "How shameless!" As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly swung her fist through the air. Jian Mu's expression changed and he swiftly slashed with his sword. Bang! In an instant, Jian Mu was blasted flying. Moreover, the sword hall behind him was instantly transformed into powder. The others in the surroundings were astounded when they witnessed this scene. That little girl's strength is actually so formidable. Jian Mu's face was covered in astonishment as well. He hadn't expected that the little girl's strength would actually be so terrifying. That punch had directly injured his internal organs. The little girl glanced at Jian Mu with an emotionless expression. "You hit his younger sister. How shameless." Jian Mu's expression was extremely unsightly. "Why are both of you helping him?" He couldn't figure it out. Both the little girl and the white fellow were trump cards left behind by the sword sect's founding ancestor, and the sword sect had never utilized them. If it wasn't for the sake of keeping Yi Xian busy just now, the sword sect wouldn't have utilized them as well. However, he didn't expect that these two little fellas would actually help Yi Xian. Help Yi Xian? Why was that? The little girl took out a stick of candied hawthorn and licked it before saying, "He's one of us." "I don't know you." When he spoke up to her, he paused slightly and said, "That Lin Chi, where's little Lin?" Jian Mu's pupils suddenly constricted when he heard this. Lynch. Actually, the sword sect wasn't founded by the green-clothed man, it was founded by Lin Chi. However, after Lin Chi founded the sword sect, he directly appointed the green-clothed man as the founding ancestor. So, the entire sword sect had no choice but to acknowledge the green-clothed man as the founding ancestor. However, the real founder of the sword sect was Lynch. Jian Mu never imagined that this little girl actually knew Lin Chi and even called him Little Lin. Who was this person in front of them? The more he thought about it, the more terrifying it was. Jianmu was just about to speak when the little girl suddenly said, "You wanted to seize his treasures but you couldn't do anything to him, so you went to deal with his younger sister, right?" Everyone in the surroundings gazed at Jianmu when they heard this. Actually, most of the members of the sword sect weren't aware of the sequence of events. They only knew that Yi Xian had come to the sword sect to kill, but they didn't know why Yi Xian had come to the sword sect to kill. Yet now, the little girl's words allowed them to understand that Yi Xian hadn't come to kill for no reason. Jianmu gazed at the little girl. "I shouldn't have let you out." At this moment he was truly regretful. He didn't regret going against Yi Xian, and he regretted letting this little girl and that white-colored little fellow out. Especially this little girl's strength was too terrifying. The little girl laughed coldly when she heard Jianmu. "You dared to touch Brother Yang's people? Looks to me like you're tired of living." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly vanished on the spot. Jianmu's expression instantly changed drastically when he witnessed this scene. He suddenly took a step forward while he pressed his palms together, and then an energy sword that was over 10 m long suddenly condensed above him. In the next moment, the energy sword carried an obliterating force as it slashed down forcefully. Meanwhile, the little girl just happened to appear in front of him and she smashed her fist forward. Bang! The energy sword exploded apart. At the same time, Jianmu was blasted flying, and the little girl smashed her fist forward once more. Bang! In the distance, Jianmu's entire body had been sent flying thousands of meters away, and the space in front of her and Jianmu had already turned pitch black. The might of a single punch was so formidable. The expressions of the experts of the sword sect were extremely unsightly. Yi Xian was already sufficiently terrifying, but this little girl was even more terrifying than Yi Xian. The little girl was about to attack again when Jianmu suddenly spoke fiercely. "What? Do you want my sword sect to be annihilated?" The little girl's beautiful brows knit together slightly when she heard this, and then she stopped. Annihilate the sword sect? She hadn't thought of that. After all, the sword sect had acknowledged her older brother as its founding ancestor. It wouldn't be good to annihilate it just like that. Jianmu heaved a slight sigh of relief when he saw the little girl hesitate. He wasn't really afraid of Yi Xian, but he was really quite afraid of the little girl. After all, her strength was truly too terrifying. Most importantly, her defenses were extremely formidable. Her physical defenses were formidable to an extremely terrifying degree, and there were probably very few people in the fourth dimension who could penetrate her defenses. Suddenly, the little girl said, "I've thought of a way." Jianmu gazed at her and the little girl stared back at him. "I'll kill you and then..." As she spoke, she pointed at Yi Xian, "Then make him the sect master of the sword sect." Jianmu was speechless. Everyone else was speechless. Make Yi Xian the sect master? The more she thought about it, the more she felt that it was a good idea. So she gazed at Jianmu, "But I have to kill you before that. Otherwise, he might not be able to become the sect master." As soon as she finished speaking, she was about to attack. However, a formidable aura suddenly emanated from Yi Xian. The little girl's brows knit together slightly when she witnessed this scene, because she noticed that she was slightly unable to suppress Yi Xian's bloodline. The energy of that bloodline was attacking her strength once more. If she were to attack, then that bloodline would erupt once more. The little girl thought for a moment, and then she gazed at the white fellow who stood not too far away. "Should I heal him first?" The white fellow blinked, and then she pointed her little claw lightly at Yiling. Obviously, what she meant was that she couldn't spare her claw right now. The little girl gazed at Yi Xian with a slightly helpless expression. She had to suppress Yi Xian's bloodline right now. Otherwise, if she didn't, then Yi Xian might kill everyone in the sword sect. That wasn't something she wanted to see happen. She only wanted to kill Jianmu, and then give the position of sword sect leader to Yi Xian. In this way it would be the best of both worlds. Right at this moment, Jianmu suddenly opened his palm and then he pressed it down lightly. A ray of white light shot out from the ruins of the sword hall. A ray of white light suddenly shot into the sky. Everyone looked at the ray of white light because it was the sword sect's final trump card. Actually, all the experts of the sword sect were slightly panicked. What would they do if their final trump card helped Yi Xian as well? What should they do? They would only be doomed. The little girl gazed at the ray of white light as well, and there was a trace of bewilderment in her eyes. Suddenly, her pupils constricted slightly, and then she pulled Yi Xian behind her and smashed her fist forward. At the instant that the little girl's fist collided with the ray of white light, a fine and imperceptible ray of light suddenly flew out from within the ray of white light. Bang! The little girl took Yi Xian with her as she retreated explosively. The space where Yi Xian and she retreated was instantly obliterated, and both Yi Xian and her retreated by over 10 kilometers. The others in the surroundings were shocked when they witnessed this scene, and they gazed at the ray of white light. However, they were unable to see anything at all. The white little fellow was gazing at the ray of white light as well, and there was a trace of bewilderment in her eyes. The little girl stopped moving and she glanced at her fist. Her fist had turned red. On the other side, Jianmu's face was extremely gloomy when he witnessed this scene. He hadn't imagined that the little girl's physical body would actually be strong to such an extent. The little girl gazed at the ray of white light in the sky, and there was nothing within it. She couldn't see anything at all. The little girl slowly clenched her right fist. It wasn't left behind by my older brother. When she spoke up to hear, she gazed at Jianmu. It's the energy of another world. Another world. Jianmu stared fixedly at the little girl. You actually know of another world. The little girl grunted coldly. She put away the candied fruit in her left hand, and then she slowly clenched her fists. Right at this moment, the ray of white light in the sky suddenly shook, and then the little girl suddenly pushed her arms forward. Bang! The space around the little girl and Yi Xian collapsed. At the same time, a strand of blood-red flames instantly enveloped the little girl and Yi Xian. Jianmu stared fixedly at that area in the distance. Right at this moment, a formidable force suddenly erupted from that area, and then the blood-red flames surged towards the surroundings. Everywhere the flames passed, space was instantly incinerated into nothingness. Meanwhile, the little girl walked over with Yi Xian in her hand. She was still utilizing a portion of her energy to suppress Yi Xian's bloodline. Jianmu's expression instantly turned gloomy when he saw the little girl, because he noticed that the blood-red flames actually hadn't harmed the little girl at all. She wasn't in her main body. How terrifying would she be if her main body was here? Jianmu didn't dare imagine it. Meanwhile, the little girl suddenly raised her head to gaze at the white light, and then she suddenly smashed her fist upwards. Bang! The white light trembled violently, and an invisible power surged out of it. This power actually shattered the little girl's power. Not only that, but it also arrived in front of the little girl. The little girl smashed her fist forward once more. Bang! The force was directly blasted apart while the white light in the sky merely trembled slightly, yet it wasn't damaged at all. Jianmu stared fixedly at the little girl and said, "You can't stop it." The little girl glanced coldly at Jianmu and said, "Have I ever feared anyone?" Meanwhile, the little white fellow suddenly waved her little claw and seemed to be saying something. The little girl fell silent for a moment before she said, "Besides my big sister and my older brother, and that woman, have I ever feared anyone?" The Respected Blade. Chapter 839. When had she ever been afraid of anyone? Besides those 3 people that she'd spoken about, she'd never been afraid of anyone. Even if the ray of white light before her was the energy of another world. Jianmu laughed ferociously when he heard the little girl. "All right, then let me see how monstrous you are." As soon as he finished speaking, he moved aside. Meanwhile, the ray of white light in the sky suddenly started trembling. The little girl gazed at it. "White, can you heal this fellow first? Otherwise, I won't be able to exert my full strength." She was using most of her strength to suppress Yi Xian's bloodline. Snowy shook her head instead. She couldn't leave Yiling right now, because numerous mysterious auras had appeared on Yiling, and Yiling was still madly absorbing her violet energy. If her violet energy was cut off, then all her efforts would be in vain. "I can't leave." At the same time, her body had started to gradually become illusory because she was madly transferring violet energy to Yiling. The little girl puckered her lips. How troublesome. Meanwhile, the ray of white light suddenly trembled, and then a snow-white ray of light suddenly slashed down from within it. At the instant that this ray of light appeared, the space here had instantly become illusory. No, the entire sword dimension had become illusory. It couldn't endure the might of this ray of light. The little girl's eyes narrowed slightly. "I can't be bothered with you anymore." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly transformed into a ray of black light that shot into the sky. She didn't swing her fist and she just smashed her head against the ray of light. In next to no time, the ray of light slashed against her pair of black horns. Bang! The ray of light instantly exploded apart. However, the little girl was blasted back to the spot by the powerful force within the ray of light. Bang! The ground where the little girl stood exploded apart. At the same time, her body gradually became illusory as well. It was a consumption. Both she and the white fellow weren't in their true forms. So, every single time they utilized their strength, it was a form of consumption to them. Without the support of their true forms, they would vanish once the consumption increased. A savage smile arose on the corners of Jianmu's mouth when he saw the little girl's body gradually become illusory. Aren't you very good at fighting? Continue. The little girl glanced at Jianmu. I'll kill you first. As soon as she finished speaking, she disappeared on the spot. In the distance, Jianmu's expression changed. He waved his right hand and a wave of sword light rippled out from his hand. However, this stretch of sword light was directly shattered by the little girl's fist. Not only that, but he was also blasted away by this powerful force. The little girl was about to attack again when another saber light flew out from the white light in the sky. The little girl suddenly raised her head and punched upwards. Boom! The saber light exploded and turned into nothingness. The little girl's body became even more illusory. Sensing this, the little girl slightly frowned. In the air, another saber light slashed down. The little girl looked up and punched out. Just like that, as more and more saber lights appeared, the little girl's body became more and more illusory. In the end, she was almost transparent. At this moment, the little girl suddenly stopped. She looked at the white light in the distance. I'm so angry. As she spoke, she gazed at the white little fellow, and she was just about to speak when her figure vanished. The white little fellow blinked, and her body had become completely illusory. She looked down at Yiling and then she suddenly opened her mouth and spat. Countless strands of violet energy surged madly from her mouth, and they surged into Yiling's body. After Yiling's body madly absorbed the violet energy, she suddenly clenched her fists tightly. However, the white little fellow was growing more and more illusory. Meanwhile, Jianmu suddenly gazed at Yiling. As he gazed at Yiling, who was lying on the ground, a strand of uneasiness suddenly arose in his heart, and it was growing stronger and stronger. Danger. Terror. That was what he felt right now. He didn't have such a feeling even when he faced the little girl just now. After a moment of silence, Jianmu suddenly said, "Kill the little girl first. Kill the little girl first." The white light in the sky suddenly trembled violently, and then a flying knife suddenly flew out. This time the flying knife's target was Yiling, who was below, suddenly opened her eyes. However, her eyes were completely white. The white little fellow was shocked when she saw Yiling suddenly open her eyes, and then she blinked and lightly tapped Yiling. However, Yiling didn't react. The expanse of white in Yiling's eyes suddenly started to revolve like a white vortex. The white little fellow's claws trembled, and then she hesitated for a moment before continuing to transfer violet energy to Yiling. Moreover, the flying knife had arrived above them. Meanwhile, Zhou Xian suddenly appeared above them. As soon as Zhou Xian raised his head, an expanse of blood-red light surged out from his eyes. However, the blood-red light exploded upon contact with the flying knife, and then the flying knife slashed towards Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian swiftly raised his sword with both hands to block it. Bang! The space in the surroundings trembled violently and then it cracked apart. A strand of blood essence sprayed out from Zhou Xian's mouth. At the same time, his arms had cracked apart like a spider's web and fresh blood sprayed from them. However, the flying knife had vanished. Meanwhile, the white little fellow was growing more and more illusory because she'd emanated too much violet energy. Right when she was about to vanish, the little fellow gazed at Yiling. Yiling's hair had suddenly turned silver. Moreover, there was a small crack between her brows, and this crack wasn't just madly absorbing the violet energy, it was even absorbing the spirit energy in the heavens and the earth. Jianmu's expression changed when he witnessed this scene, and his intuition told him that something bad was about to occur. Jianmu raised his head to look at the white light, and he practically roared furiously. "Kill that little girl first. Kill her." The white light trembled slightly in midair and then it started revolving. In next to no time, an invisible pressure slowly seeped out from it, and it seemed like something was approaching. In the distance, the white little fellow gazed at Zhou Xian, waved her little claw and then vanished completely. After she vanished, a strand of violet light directly entered the center of Yiling's brows. Yiling's sleeves had suddenly transformed into ash, and then numerous tiny blood-red talismans had suddenly appeared on her tiny arms. These talismans were extremely strange and they seemed to be converging something. Moreover, the light in the surroundings had suddenly dimmed down while chilly winds blew in waves. It seemed like something was wailing and it was an extremely horrifying sight. Jianmu's expression changed drastically when he witnessed this scene, and he roared madly with fury. Kill her! Kill her! Because the uneasiness in his heart was growing stronger and stronger. Terror. Presently, deep terror filled the depths of his heart. His intuition told him that something terrible would occur if the little girl didn't die. In midair, a saber suddenly flew out from within the expanse of white light. At the instant this saber appeared, the sword world in an area of a few thousands of kilometers suddenly started to collapse inch by inch. The expressions of Jianmu and the other experts of the sword sect changed drastically when they witnessed this scene, and Jianmu shouted furiously, "Do you intend to kill us as well?" There was no reply. The saber slashed down slowly from midair. Everywhere it passed, space was transformed into nothingness, and the sword world was utterly unable to endure this force and started to collapse inch by inch. Countless experts of the sword sect were horrified, and they hurriedly tried to protect themselves. Jianmu's expression changed drastically as well because he hadn't expected that the saber would actually be so formidable. The entire sword world would be destroyed if this saber descended. After hesitating for a short while, Jianmu didn't stop it in the end, nor was he able to stop it. Even though he didn't want the sword world to be destroyed, he wanted Yi Xian and Yi Ling to die even more. In the distance, Yi Xian raised his head and looked at the expanse of blood-red light. His right hand held tightly onto Executioner Heaven while his arms were still in a cracked state. The injuries he suffered were too severe, and even the spring of life couldn't heal them in a short period of time. Below Yi Xian, Yi Ling's eyes had returned to normal. She just looked at Yi Xian with an indifferent and emotionless gaze. The blood-red runes on her arms grew more and more numerous, and they grew brighter and brighter. Moreover, the gloomy winds in the surroundings grew stronger, and the sorrowful voice grew louder as well. It was extremely horrifying. In midair, the saber had arrived above Yi Xian's head. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly slashed his sword upwards. At the instant he attacked, the saber suddenly slashed down. Bang! As soon as the saber and sword collided, Executioner Heaven shook violently while Yi Xian's right arm exploded into a mist of blood. However, the saber hadn't vanished yet. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly held soul-suppressing sword in his left hand and blocked it. Bang! Yi Xian directly smashed into the ground in front of Yi Ling. At this moment his entire left arm was completely cracked and his bones could be seen. Not only that, but his entire body had also completely cracked and he was like a porcelain man that had suffered a heavy blow. However, the saber still didn't disappear. It directly slashed down towards Yi Ling below. If this saber fell, Yi Ling would definitely die. Just when the saber was half a foot away from Yi Ling, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of Yi Ling. He held Executioner Heaven in his left hand and blocked it. The saber slashed down on Executioner Heaven. Executioner Heaven shook violently, and Yi Xian instantly spat out a mouthful of blood essence. Immediately after, he was directly sent flying. At this moment, the saber slashed straight at Yi Ling. Yi Ling looked at the saber, and there was no color in her eyes at all. The runes on her arm had already spread to her shoulder. Just when the saber was about to slash Yi Ling, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of Yi Ling and directly hugged Yi Ling. At this moment, the saber pierced through his chest from the back. The tip of the saber had just pierced through Yi Xian's chest when Yi Xian's already broken left hand suddenly covered the tip of the saber tightly, not allowing the saber to penetrate even half an inch. However, the force of the saber was too strong, and the tip of the saber directly pierced through his palm and continued to slash towards Yi Ling. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly roared in anger. His left hand gripped the saber and countless sword intent and bloodline power enveloped the tip of the saber like a tide. Finally, the saber stopped a few inches away from Yi Ling's eyebrows. Yi Xian suddenly grinned and blood gushed out like a spring. "Don't be afraid, brother. P.S. Here's a small red packet. Remember to snatch it, there are crosscut coins." Chapter 840. A trace of fluctuation had finally appeared in Yiling's eyes when he heard Yi Xian. On the other side, Jian Mu instantly heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Yi Xian's chest had been pierced through by the saber. He's finally dead. Regardless of whether it was Yi Ling or Yi Xian, both of them must die. He wouldn't be at ease until they died. Yi Xian's aura was growing weaker and weaker. However, his left hand was still holding tightly onto the blade of the saber, and he didn't allow it to move even an inch further. At this moment, the swordwood in the distance suddenly disappeared. In the next moment, a sword appeared behind Yi Xian. He couldn't wait any longer. Right at this moment, the talisman markings on Yi Ling's arms suddenly converged at her throat, and then, right at this moment, Yi Ling's eyes suddenly turned a strange dark red color. Right when Jian Mu's sword was half an inch away from the back of Yi Xian's head, a hand had suddenly grabbed onto his sword. It was Yi Ling's hand. Jian Mu gazed at Yi Ling with astonishment. He was just about to speak when Yi Ling's hand suddenly clamped down on his throat. Everyone in the surroundings was shocked. Even Jian Mu was inconsolably shocked in his heart. He hadn't even been able to react to it. How could this be possible? Even that horned little girl wasn't able to render him powerless to fight back. Yi Ling gazed at Jian Mu, and her voice was icy cold and completely emotionless. I grant you death. As soon as she finished speaking, Jian Mu's eyes suddenly opened wide. In the next moment, his aura vanished and he perished on the spot. The experts of the sword sect were stunned when they witnessed this scene, and all of them retreated explosively. Yi Ling glanced at the experts of the sword sect. In the next moment, all of them froze on the spot and then they fell down one by one. In an instant, a few dozen experts of the sword sect had perished. Yi Ling turned around to gaze at Yi Xian. She just gazed at Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian's aura was growing weaker and weaker. Yi Ling walked over to Yi Xian and then she opened her palm. The pagoda within Yi Xian's body had appeared in her palm. Her beautiful brows knit together slightly as she gazed at the pagoda in her palm. A short while passed before she turned around and left with the pagoda in her hand. However, she hadn't even taken 2 steps before she stopped, and then she turned around and walked over to Yi Xian. She gazed at Yi Xian for a very long time before she placed her right hand lightly on Yi Xian's shoulder. The talismans on her arms suddenly started to tremble, and it didn't take long for the center of her forehead to split open before a ray of black light suddenly surged into the center of Yi Xian's forehead. As soon as the ray of black light entered his forehead, the bloodline within Yi Xian's body instantly calmed down. Moreover, a strand of black energy started to repair Yi Xian's body. Right at this moment, the ray of white light in the sky suddenly trembled slightly, and then a formidable aura suddenly swept out from within it. Yi Ling ignored that aura and withdrew her hand. At this moment, Yi Xian had already returned to normal, but he still hadn't woken up. At this moment, an illusory hand suddenly stretched out from the ray of white light in the sky. At the moment this hand appeared, the entire sword realm directly collapsed. And the target of this hand was Yi Xian. Yi Ling raised her head to look at the hand and her eyes suddenly turned black. In the next moment, the hand turned into nothingness. Not only that, but a powerful force directly entered the ray of white light. After a moment of silence, a shocked voice suddenly sounded out from the distant ray of white light. You are the Shura Empress, the last great emperor of the mortal world. How is this possible? Your Excellency, I'm sorry. We have absolutely no ill intentions towards Your Excellency. Please forgive us. The voice was trembling. Yi Ling didn't speak. She suddenly grasped the air with her right hand. Bang! The beam of white light exploded. But then the light disappeared. Then it vanished. Yi Ling looked at the world prison pagoda in her hand, then turned to leave. At this moment, a weak voice came from behind her. Ling. Yi Ling stopped in her tracks. The emotions of the mortal world are worth your life? Yi Xian's consciousness was still a bit hazy. He weakly said, Ling. Don't go. Yi Ling raised her head to look at the horizon. After a moment she turned to look at Yi Xian. Then, the world prison pagoda in her hand suddenly flew in front of him. Save me. I won't take this. When we meet again in the 5th dimension, I definitely won't show mercy. As her voice fell, she suddenly turned into a ray of black light and soared into the sky. In the horizon, space was directly torn apart. In the blink of an eye, Yi Ling directly disappeared into the horizon. Below, Yi Xian was stunned. In the void, Yiling shuttled through space. Finally, she arrived at the barrier between the fourth dimension and the fifth dimension. This was the seal that the prophet had left behind. The moment Yiling appeared, an illusory, "stop," word suddenly floated out. Yiling's face was expressionless. She suddenly disappeared from where she stood. Boom. In this empty space, an explosion suddenly sounded. After a moment, the barrier directly split apart. Yiling walked in. Behind her, the barrier began to slowly close up. At this moment, Yiling's body suddenly trembled. She stopped. Just as the barrier was about to completely close up, she turned to look at it. Her eyes were filled with reluctance. "Brother." At this moment, her eyes suddenly became cold. She looked deeply below her, then turned and left. Below, Zhou Xian just lay on the ground. His eyes were filled with confusion. The Yiling just now was so unfamiliar. He had never felt so unfamiliar before. He knew that the Yiling just now might not be the Yiling he knew. What exactly happened? Zhou Xian could not understand it no matter how he thought about it. However, he was clear about one thing. Yiling had gone to the fifth dimension. And she must have succeeded. After a moment, Zhou Xian slowly closed his eyes. He clenched his fists. After a long time, he suddenly opened his eyes. To the fifth dimension. No matter what happened to Yiling, he must go to the fifth dimension to find her. Zhou Xian stood up. He waved his right hand and the executing heaven sword flew into his hand. At the same time, he put away the prison pagoda and walked outside. At this moment, a group of people was waiting outside the sword realm. The experts of the dual realm sky. The leader was Grand Elder Qin. The moment he saw Zhou Xian come out, Grand Elder Chen's right hand trembled slightly. Because the sword realm was gone. The sword realm was gone. Grand Elder Qin calmed himself down and then walked in front of Zhou Xian. He smiled. "Little friend, this sword sect." Zhou Xian did not speak. He quickly disappeared into the distance. At this moment, Qin Shi suddenly appeared in front of Grand Elder Qin. Qin Shi said in a low voice, "Grand Elder, everyone in the sword sect has fallen. Not a single one survived." Grand Elder Qin was stunned when he heard this. The experts of the dual realm sky were dumbfounded as well. The sword sect, the strongest sect in the fourth dimension, had been annihilated just like that. Zhou Xian did it? Grand Elder Qin and the others became extremely solemn. After Zhou Xian left the sword realm, he returned to the northern region. When they saw Zhou Xian and Lan Xiao and the others heaved a heavy sigh of relief. He had returned alive. However, their hearts were still heavy because they did not see Yiling. Zhou Xian returned to his room. Zhou Xian sat quietly in his room. The fifth dimension. He took out the world prison pagoda. He knew that if he wanted to go to the fifth dimension he had to rely on it. Because with his current strength, it was impossible for him to break through the fifth dimension. At this moment, Lian Qian appeared in front of Zhou Xian. She glanced at Zhou Xian and said, "My apologies." She was referring to the fact that he did not come out to help in the sword world. Zhou Xian shook his head. "How can I blame you?" As he spoke, he looked at the world prison pagoda. "How can I use this pagoda to enter the fifth dimension?" Lian Qian was silent. Zhou Xian looked at Lian Qian. Lian Qian said softly, "You reached the fifth dimension. What happened after that?" Zhou Xian was silent. Lian Qian continued, "Even if you go to the fifth dimension now, you won't be able to change anything. Besides, do you know what happened to your sister?" Zhou Xian shook his head. Lian Qian said softly, "I know your sister is very strong." Zhou Xian looked at Lian Qian. Lian Qian had a complicated expression. Her true identity is the Shura Empress of the fifth dimension. She is also the last Empress of the human world. Zhou Xian frowned. Shura Empress? The last Empress of the human world? Lian Qian nodded. No one knows what her real name is. They only know that she came from the Azura Hell. When she came out, she directly swept away all the emperors of the fifth dimension. After she defeated the strongest emperor of the fifth dimension in 3 moves, no one in the fifth dimension dared to call themselves emperors in front of her. Later on, no one dared to call themselves emperors because they were not worthy in front of her. She is the most powerful woman in the fifth dimension, and also the most powerful woman in the history of the fifth dimension. As she said this, she slightly paused and then continued, "In the fifth dimension no one dares to provoke her. Even the master of the fifth dimension doesn't dare to rashly provoke her. However, what I don't understand is why she appeared in the fourth dimension. Moreover, she became your sister. Xian suddenly asked. She is my sister and also the Shura Empress. Xian was silent. Xian asked again, what is it? Xian softly said, she is your sister but she might not be. This depends on her. However, I feel that she should be. Moreover, she hasn't forgotten everything. Xian looked at Xian. Why? Xian solemnly said, if she was only the Shura Empress she definitely wouldn't have let you go. Moreover, she wouldn't have left this pagoda here. Therefore I feel that she should still be your sister. Otherwise you wouldn't have survived. Xian was silent. Xian continued, even if she reincarnated, you must understand that she reincarnated into your sister in this life. This is something she can't erase. Even if she has the memories of her previous life, this is a fact that cannot be changed. But, as she said this, she paused and then continued, but if you still want to be her brother, you should know how difficult it is. Xian suddenly said, go to the fifth dimension. Xian said, you don't need this pagoda. Xian looked at Xian. Xian solemnly said, you must rely on your own strength to force your way through. Only then can you survive in the fifth dimension. If you use this pagoda to take a shortcut, you won't have the ability to survive there, let alone find your sister. After a moment of silence, Xian said, then I'll force my way through. Force his way through the fifth dimension. Chapter 841. Xian knew what Xian meant. With his current strength, if he borrowed the world prison pagoda to go to the fifth dimension, there would only be one result. Waiting for death. With his current strength, it was impossible for him to fight against the experts of the fifth dimension. If he did not use the power of his bloodline, he might not even be able to defeat a life-breaking expert. With this kind of strength, how could he go to the fifth dimension? How could he find his sister Yiling? No way. Xian stood up and slowly walked to the side of the house, softly saying, I am still not strong enough. But, what level do I have to reach to be considered strong? Along the way he became stronger and stronger but also weaker and weaker. The stronger his strength, the more people he met and the things he encountered would naturally change. What was considered strong? Invincible in the fourth dimension. However, there was still the fifth dimension. In the fifth dimension, would being invincible in the fourth dimension still be considered invincible? Endless martial path. Endless sword path. This was a road without end. At this time Xian suddenly said, what you need to do now is to reach the peak of this world. Your sword path should at least reach the mortal realm or touch the mortal realm. Only then will you not be powerless to fight back when you go to the fifth dimension. Because you have this pagoda, it means that your opponents in the fifth dimension are also extremely powerful existences. Saying this, she walked to Xian's side and softly said, you have to understand that going to the fifth dimension might be a new beginning for you, but it might also be the end. Because the experts of the fifth dimension will not give you a chance. They know your background and know that there are people behind you. They will not look down on you like the experts of the fourth dimension. If they attack you, they will definitely use their full strength because the World Prison Pagoda is too important to them. World Prison Pagoda. As if thinking of something, Xian softly sighed. Those people will really go crazy because Master's Universal Library is an irresistible temptation for them. Xian suddenly asked. This time the people behind the sword sect should be experts of the fifth dimension. Miss Xian, do you know who they are? Xian was silent. Just as Xian was about to say something, Xian suddenly said, when you reach the fifth dimension in the future, you will naturally know. Xian nodded. I understand. At this moment a woman walked over. Xianxia. Xianxia walked over to Xian and said in a light voice, are you all right? Xian shook his head. I'm fine. Xianxia nodded and said in a light voice, don't do that next time. Xian said softly, we must all live well. Xianxia nodded. All of you must live well. Xian walked to the front of the hall, and he gazed at the distant horizon for a long time before he said softly, I'm going to the sword world. As soon as he finished speaking, he disappeared. Sword world. At this moment the sword world had turned pitch black. Xian looked around. In the end he found some swords in this pitch-black space. The sword left behind by the sword sect. There were more than 20 of them. Since these swords were able to be preserved, they were naturally extraordinary. However, these 20 swords weren't complete and they were slightly damaged. After he put the 20 swords away, Yi Xian turned around and left. In the end he arrived at a deserted mountain range. Devour. Yi Xian directly devoured all 20 swords. Actually, his body had already undergone a tremendous change. It was an earth-shattering change. Because he'd devoured too many swords and sword qi while he was in the sword sect. However, this energy had been forcefully suppressed by Yi Ling. At that time, Yi Ling had actually suppressed his bloodline. However, she was too strong and she directly suppressed all the energy within his body. Now, as soon as he devoured these swords, the energy within his body suddenly erupted. Bang! Countless strands of sword qi suddenly appeared around Yi Xian, and his body actually started to transform layer by layer. Yi Xian was stunned when he noticed this scene. What's going on? Bang! A surge of sword intent suddenly surged out of his body, and then this sword intent directly enveloped him. Under the envelopment of this sword intent, a tiny strand of sword qi actually appeared within his skin. Yi Xian was shocked and this change made him slightly panic. However, he quickly calmed down because he knew that this might be related to the invincible sword body that the plain-dressed woman had given him. Could it be that he was going to transform? Yi Xian thought about it and then let the sword intent and sword qi transform his body. At this moment he suddenly felt waves of pain in his body, as if he was being pricked by countless needles. Yi Xian was shocked, and he hurriedly began to absorb the spring of life within the prison pagoda. As soon as this spring of life came into contact with his body, it was directly absorbed cleanly. Soon, the spring of life within the prison pagoda disappeared at a speed that could be seen with the naked eye. After absorbing an endless amount of spring of life, Yi Xian discovered that the pain did not disappear, and on the contrary it was getting worse. At this moment he had no time to care about the changes in his body. Because it was too painful. He had never felt such pain before, as if all the nerves in his body were being pricked by needles. What's going on? At this moment Yi Xian was still a little confused. This continued for about a day and a night, and during this day and night he experienced hellish torture, and there were many times when he wanted to die. Because that kind of pain was really too unbearable. At noon he felt that the pain in his body had greatly lessened. At this moment, Lian Qian suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. She looked at Yi Xian and her brows slightly furrowed. Yi Xian looked at Lian Qian. What is it? Lian Qian glanced at Yi Xian and her expression became somewhat solemn. Your body. Yi Xian slowly stood up and he glanced at his body. In the next moment he was directly stunned. At this moment his body hadn't changed at all. However, if one took a closer look, one would notice that his skin actually contained boundless sword energy and sword intent. His body now seemed to be formed by sword energy and sword intent. Invincible sword physique. At this moment he truly understood what it meant to be invincible sword physique. His current physique was equivalent to the sword physique, but as for whether it was invincible or not he wasn't particularly sure. At this moment Lian Qian suddenly said, "This cultivation technique of yours is really strange. Now that your body, sword intent and sword energy have merged into one, it can be said that your current physical body has become extremely strong to an extremely terrifying degree. Try using that sword of yours." Hearing this, Yi Xian suddenly took out the executing heaven sword and slashed at his body. Sizzle. A ray of fiery light flickered on his body. Moreover, his body was completely unharmed. However, a lot of sword intent and sword energy had disappeared, but he could immediately replenish them. Lian Qian said, "Your physical body is amazing." Yi Xian nodded slightly. Deep down he was also extremely shocked. His current physical body could be said to be extremely strong. It should be known that even the executing heaven sword couldn't cut through him. Apart from that, his cultivation stage had also changed. He had directly advanced from the extreme creation stage to the earth celestial stage. As for his physical body, his current physical body could no longer be measured by cultivation stage. His current physical body could definitely resist the strength of a powerhouse at the level of Mu Qingfeng. Not only Mu Qingfeng, but even a powerhouse at the level of Jianmu would not be able to easily destroy his physical body. Apart from that, if he were to face a swordsman now, as long as it wasn't an extremely strong swordsman, he would be in an invincible position. Of course, he didn't dare to be complacent. After all, there were countless powerhouses in this world. If he really encountered a swordsman at the level of the sword master at the top of the pagoda and underestimated his enemy, then he would really be courting death. Even though his strength had improved greatly, Yi Xian knew that it was far from enough. Yi Xian gazed at Lian Qian and the latter fell silent for a moment before she said, "You have to stop your cultivation for a while. You can only charge towards the life realm after it's stabilized. During this period you have to strengthen 3 things. Firstly, your sword Dao. Secondly, your sword technique. Thirdly, your sword domain. That's your core. Especially your sword technique. You don't just have to cultivate your boundless sword well, you have to cultivate your single strike of life and death well as well." Single strike of life and death. Yi Xian fell silent. He naturally hadn't forgotten this sword technique because it was the woman in a plain dress who taught him this sword technique. However, he'd rarely used this sword technique since he'd utilized the boundless sword. Isn't this single strike of life and death strong? The woman in a plain dress's sword technique is definitely strong. Meanwhile, Lian Qian said, "I've been studying your single strike of life and death lately, and I noticed that this sword technique can be said to have no upper limit. It has no upper limit, but it's very difficult to bring forth its true might. Yet now both your strength and sword technique have improved greatly. So long as you're able to comprehend the essence of this sword technique, then you'll be able to bring forth its true might." Yi Xian nodded. "I understand." Lian Qian shook her head. "You still don't fully understand it. You have to remember that this sword technique doesn't have an upper limit, but it doesn't have a lower limit as well. If you're unable to truly understand its essence, then you'll be unable to bring forth its true might." Yi Xian fell silent. Single strike of life and death. He'd heard from the woman in a plain dress that the might of this sword technique depended on one's attitude. Once this sword technique was executed, one's opponent would live and die according to its will. This was the core of this sword technique. It sounded very simple, but how difficult was it to accomplish? Single strike of life and death. From his point of view, this sword technique was meant for the strong to use against the weak. Only the strong would have such a disdainful state of mind towards the weak. How could a person with lower strength be able to decide the life and death of another person with a single strike? However, he also understood that the woman in a plain dress must have had her reasons for teaching him this sword technique. So here's the problem. How was he supposed to use this sword skill? Yi Xian fell into deep thought. Lian Qian retreated to the side and didn't disturb Yi Xian. Lian Qian looked at the horizon with a trace of worry in her eyes. Yi Xian would definitely go to the 5th dimension. And once Yi Xian went to the 5th dimension, one must know that the current 5th dimension no longer had a prophet. It was no longer the 5th dimension that she was familiar with. Chapter 842. In the mountain range, Yi Xian sat on top of a mountain with a sword floating in front of him. One sword to decide life and death. At that moment, his mind kept replaying the scene of the plain-dressed woman killing people. How did the plain-dressed woman kill people? Contempt. In the eyes of the plain-dressed woman, it was disregard for life. In her eyes, everyone was like an ant. Confidence. At the end of the day, it was confidence. Of course, the reason why she was confident was because of her strength. Therefore, the core of this one sword to decide life and death was strength. However, other than strength, there was another core, and that was confidence. When facing an enemy, one must have confidence. Even if one could not win, one must have the confidence to kill with one sword. This was not deceiving oneself. If one did not have confidence, one would not be able to achieve anything. Confidence did not mean one had to be blindly confident. If one was blindly confident, one would be deceiving oneself and others. Yi Xian extended his hand and held the executing heaven sword in front of him. Confidence? What was his confidence based on? His backer? One had to admit that there was a time when his confidence was his backer. The plain-dressed woman, Lian, the prison pagoda, the executing heaven sword. To put it simply, his confidence was actually built on external objects and forces. This kind of confidence was superficial and unrealistic. Just like this time at the sword sect, the plain-dressed woman was not there, Lian was not there, and not only did he almost die, but Yiling almost died as well. Without external forces, could he still be confident? At that moment, Yi Xian understood a little. His confidence was wrong. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Along the way, too many people had helped him. As for himself, not only was he not ashamed of it, he was even a little smug. Just think about it, if he didn't have the woman in a simple dress and those people that were helping him from behind, would he be able to survive until now? One must rely on oneself. Rely on oneself. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Lian Qian glanced at Yi Xian but did not say anything. Ever since Yi Ling left, she realized that Yi Xian had changed. As for what had changed, she could not tell. However, this shouldn't be a bad thing, because she found Yi Xian had not really grown up until then. In the following days, Yi Xian spent every day crazily researching the life and death sword. This was the sword skill that the plainly dressed woman had taught him, and he was going to cultivate it to the extreme. And every time, Lian Qian would guide him from the side. Yi Xian discovered that although Lian Qian's strength wasn't particularly strong, she was very knowledgeable. It could be said that in this four-dimensional universe, there weren't many people who were more knowledgeable than her. Therefore, under Lian Qian's guidance, he could be said to have improved by leaps and bounds. Moreover, the might of this sword that determined life and death was also getting stronger and stronger. Following the destruction of the sword sect, the four-dimensional universe suddenly calmed down. The dual realm sky had already guessed that the world prison pagoda was in Yi Xian's hands, but no one made a move. Who would dare to move now? Yi Xian entered the sword world and then the sword world disappeared. However, Yi Xian walked out alive. It could be said that Yi Xian was currently the most dangerous person in the four-dimensional universe. There was no one else. Therefore, even if the people of the dual realm sky knew that the world prison pagoda was in Yi Xian's hands, they didn't do anything. Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent and no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as the crown prince will be replaced by Yi Lang. The person who spoke was an old man in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the Yi clan's elders. Why? At this moment, a somewhat timid voice suddenly rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall, and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is the crown prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The Great Elder looked coldly at Yi Ling. This is a matter of the clan, why are you interrupting? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid and did not dare to look directly at the Great Elder. However, she did not leave and instead plucked up her courage to enter the ancestral hall. She once again bowed to the elders on both sides. Elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan over the mining rights at Nanshan Hill. He is fighting for the clan and it is unknown whether he is dead or alive. Yet the clan is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is really unfair. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged. Whether or not he is crippled, it is not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time the new crown prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed. You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Great Elder coldly replied, Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly 2 Yi clan's guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years and even now he is fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince Yi Lang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered, Young Master Yi Lang inherits the title of crown prince and it is everyone's wish. What are you shouting for? As he spoke he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry and only clutched her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled, What's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed. Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince. Yi Lang nodded. You're not bad. After I become the crown prince I will need 10 personal guards. From now on you will be my personal guard. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and hurriedly bowed deeply. This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the crown prince, and I am willing to die 1,000 deaths. Yi Lang nodded. Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Do not hold back. Understood? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang and when he saw the killing intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this time Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something and he suddenly stopped. Within the ancestral hall, Everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. He was dressed in a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Zhou Xian, who had rushed back from the Nanshan. Seeing Zhou Xian, Yilang's lips curled into a cold smile. Within the ancestral hall, all the elders were frowning. The great elder narrowed his eyes and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Zhou Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yiling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Zhou Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yilang and was about to speak, when Zhou Xian suddenly leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Zhou Xian's fist landed on his face. Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness and he stumbled and fell. However, Yiling did not stop and he rushed towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yilang suddenly roared, "Zhou Xian, he's my man, how dare you!" Zhou Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yilang's face turned ugly, while Zhou Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped down on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Zhou Xian did not care about Zhang Mu as he walked to Yiling's side. Seeing Yiling's state, Zhou Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists and his entire body trembled. When Yiling saw Zhou Xian, tears welled up in her eyes. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Zhou Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Zhou Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Zhou Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yilang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yilang. On both sides there were the elders of the Yi clan. "Why?" Right at this moment, a slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor and she looked a little weak. There was even a hint of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yiling and she was Zhou Xian's younger sister. When she heard that Zhou Xian was to be replaced, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yiling, what are you doing?" The girl called Yiling bowed to everyone in the hall as she asked timidly, "Great elder, my brother Zhou Xian is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason?" The great elder looked at Yiling coldly. "This is a matter of the clan, what are you interrupting for? Leave." Yiling was obviously afraid, not daring to look at the great elder, but she did not leave. Instead, she plucked up her courage and walked into the hall. Once again she bowed to the elders. "Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan over the mining rights at Nanshan. He is fighting for the clan and it is unknown whether he is dead or alive. Yet the clan is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is really unfair." Impudent. The great elder suddenly raged. "Whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away." At this time the new prince Yilang suddenly laughed. "He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others." The great elder replied coldly, "Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly 2 Yi clan guards rushed in. Yiling clenched her fists and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years and even now he is fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new prince Yilang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered, "Young master, Yilang inherits the title of prince, and it is the wish of everyone. What are you yelling about?" As he spoke he raised his hand and slapped Yiling's face. Slap. The crisp sound of the slap was heard, and the right side of Yiling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry and only held her cheek tightly. Yilang looked at the guard and smiled. "What's your name?" The guard hurriedly bowed. "Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the prince." Yilang nodded. "You're not bad. After I become the prince I will need 10 guards. From now on you will be my guard." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and hurriedly bowed deeply. "Subordinate will go through fire and water for the prince and I will do anything for you." Yilang nodded. "Drag him away." This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Do not hold back. Understood? Zhang Mu glanced at Yilang, and when he saw the killing intent in Yilang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yiling's hair and dragged her out. At this time Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something and he suddenly stopped. Within the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. He was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Zhou Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Zhou Xian, Yilang's lips curled into a cold smile. Within the ancestral hall, all the elders were frowning. The great elder narrowed his eyes and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Zhou Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yiling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Zhou Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yilang and was about to speak. At this time Zhou Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Zhou Xian's fist landed on his face. Ping. Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness and he stumbled and fell. Yilang did not stop there and he charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time Yilang suddenly roared, "Zhou Xian, he's my man, how dare you!" Zhou Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yilang's face turned ugly, while Zhou Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Zhou Xian did not care about Zhang Mu as he walked to Yiling's side. Seeing Yiling's state, Zhou Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists and his entire body trembled. When Yiling saw Zhou Xian, tears welled up in her eyes. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Zhou Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Ping. Chapter 843. Zhou Xian looked up and saw an old man slowly walking over from the horizon. The old man wore a loose black robe. His long hair was tied up and he held a horsetail whisk in his hand. There was a black mark between his eyebrows. At this moment, Emperor Shi walked over to Zhou Xian's side and said softly, "Daoist Mountain Ghost. Very strong." Daoist Mountain Ghost looked at Zhou Xian and smiled slightly. "Little friend, you have already destroyed his physical body. Can you give me some face and let him go?" At this moment the soul-suppressing sword in Zhou Xian's hand suddenly flew out. In the distance, before the old bamboo staff man could react, the soul-suppressing sword pierced his eyebrows. The next moment the soul-suppressing sword began to frantically absorb his soul. The old bamboo staff man was horrified. He wanted to resist, but how could he resist before the soul-suppressing sword? In less than a breath's time the old bamboo staff man's soul was completely absorbed. Seeing this, Daoist Mountain Ghost's eyes narrowed slightly. However, the smile on his face did not diminish. Zhou Xian waved his right hand and the soul-suppressing sword flew into his hand. Then he turned and left. Daoist Mountain Ghost was silent and did not make a move. He did not dare. In the past, no one had a true understanding of the strength of the person behind Zhou Xian. But now, after the destruction of the Sword Sect, everyone understood. The Sword Sect, the #1 sect in the world, had been destroyed by Zhou Xian. Who would dare to touch him? Even the big shots of the Dual Realm Sky were now afraid of Zhou Xian. After a moment, Daoist Mountain Ghost shook his head. "This is the old bamboo staff man's own doing." After saying this, he turned and left. After a moment of silence, Emperor Shi also turned and left. Zhou Xian did not leave the Dual Realm Sky. Instead he went to find Minister Qin. Minister Qin looked at Zhou Xian in front of him. "Little friend, that old bamboo staff man," Zhou Xian said, "Dead." "Dead?" Minister Chen's expression stiffened slightly. After a moment he nodded slightly and did not say anything. Zhou Xian suddenly asked, "How do we go to the 5th dimension?" Minister Chen was slightly startled. The next moment he said with some excitement, "Little friend, are you going to the 5th dimension?" If someone else said that they wanted to go to the 5th dimension, he would definitely scoff at it. However, Zhou Xian could go to the 5th dimension. The reason for that was because he possessed the World Prison Pagoda. Zhou Xian nodded. "Yes." Grand Elder Chen smiled excitedly. He was about to speak when Zhou Xian asked again, "Take me there?" Grand Elder Chen hurriedly nodded. "All right." Just like that, Yi Xian followed Pavilion Elder Chen upward. About 4 hours later, the two of them arrived at a starry sky. At the end of the sky was a barrier that was covered with mysterious runes. There were some corpses floating below the barrier. There weren't many of them, only a dozen or so. There were both men and women among these corpses, and they were all floating in the starry sky just like that. Looking at the barrier, Pavilion Elder Chen said softly, "Little friend, this is the barrier of the 5th dimension." Yi Xian looked at the corpses. "And these are?" Pavilion Elder Chen said in a low voice, "Powerhouses who have tried to break into the 5th dimension in the past." Yi Xian asked, "They all failed?" Pavilion Elder Chen nodded. "All failed. Some people's spiritual souls were destroyed, and their physical bodies didn't even exist. However, these dozen or so people were too strong, so their physical bodies were preserved, but their spiritual souls were destroyed." Yi Xian asked again, "How strong are they?" Pavilion Elder Chen thought for a moment, then said, "There are many Dao-breaking realm powerhouses among them." Dao-breaking realm. Yi Xian fell silent. Dao-breaking realm. This meant that Jinmu, Emperor Shi, and the other powerhouses were far from being a match for the corpses up there. It should be said that they couldn't compare at all. At that moment, Pavilion Elder Chen sighed. "Although we are all in the dual realm sky, we know that it's too difficult to force our way through. This is also why the dual realm sky and the sword sect have always been targeting little friend. Because for us, the 5th dimension's supreme treasure is really our last hope." Yi Xian said, "With my current strength, there's no hope for me to force my way through the 5th dimension, right?" Pavilion Elder Chen nodded. Yes. He knew that Yi Xian was already very strong, but if Yi Xian wanted to force his way through the 5th dimension, it would be a dead end for him. Yi Xian nodded slightly, then turned and left. Pavilion Elder Chen was stunned, then hurriedly said, "Little friend, you're not going to the 5th dimension?" Yi Xian stopped. "Pavilion Elder Chen, have you ever thought about it? Even if we use this thing to enter the 5th dimension, what then? Can we survive there?" Pavilion Elder Chen was speechless because he had never thought about this. Previously he had been thinking about how to get there. Yi Xian said again, "If we go to the 5th dimension now, we'll be sending ourselves to death." Pavilion Elder Chen was silent for a moment, then asked, "Then we're not going?" Yi Xian looked at Pavilion Elder Chen. "We're going, but we're not taking a shortcut, we're going to force our way through." Force our way through. Pavilion Elder Chen looked at Yi Xian in shock. "Little friend, you're going to force your way through the 5th dimension?" Yi Xian nodded. Pavilion Elder Chen, send a message. "Fi Yi Xian, want to go to the 5th dimension? I can use this thing to open a passage to the 5th dimension for you, but not now. I'm not strong enough right now, so I can't truly control this tower." Hearing this, Pavilion Elder Chen was a little excited, his voice trembling. "Really?" Yi Xian nodded. "Really. However, during this period I'll need some help from you. It won't be too long, 3 years at most." Pavilion Elder Chen took a deep breath, then bowed respectfully. "Within 3 years, little friend, if you have any requests, just let me know." Yi Xian nodded. "Good. Now I need some swords. The higher the grade, the better. The more months, the better." Pavilion Elder Chen said in a low voice, "Little friend, don't worry. I'll get it done in a moment." Yi Xian nodded slightly. He looked up at the 5th dimension's barrier. This time he would rely on his own strength to go to the 5th dimension, not taking any shortcuts. A moment later, Yi Xian turned into a sword light and disappeared into the horizon. In the same place, Pavilion Elder Chen looked up at the 5th dimension's barrier. 3 years. He knew that with his strength, even if he went to the 5th dimension, he would still be cannon fodder. However, he still wanted to go and take a look. Moreover, who knew if he could go to the 5th dimension and have a new beginning? In any case, he could only live in the 4th dimension. Moreover, he didn't have much time left. 3 years. To him it was just a snap of his fingers. Yi Xian came to the top of a mountain. He stood beside a cliff and slowly closed his eyes. Yiling. At this moment his mind was filled with images of Yiling leaving the 5th dimension. In the past he didn't really want to go to the 5th dimension. But now he had to go. He didn't care about the Shura Empress. He only knew that it was his sister Yiling. At this moment, Lian Qian suddenly appeared beside Yi Xian. She said in a low voice, "Ah, you found big sister." Yi Xian looked at Lian Qian. "Big sister." Lian Qian nodded. "She's our big sister. However, she said that she was delayed by something and couldn't find you for the time being." As she said that, she looked at Yi Xian. She also wants to see you. Yi Xian asked, see me? Lian Qian nodded slightly. She might be interested in you. Yi Xian said, all right. Lian Qian said, let's talk about your sword skills, sword domain and your sword intent. Your current sword domain is based on your sword intent. Therefore the core of your sword domain is your sword intent. Yi Xian asked, are there swordsmen in the fifth dimension? Lian Qian nodded. Yes, there are many. However, the swordsman in the fifth dimension is different from the swordsman in the fourth dimension. Yi Xian was curious. What's the difference? Lian Qian said in a low voice. The swordsmen in the fifth dimension cultivate the sword. However, they focus more on sword skills. Their sword skills are different from those in the fourth dimension. For example, your immeasurable sword. Actually, you don't really understand this sword skill. Yi Xian said, I'd like to hear more about it. Lian Qian said, do you know why this sword skill can ignore realms, Dao laws and laws? Yi Xian shook his head. Lian Qian said, I can't explain it to you immediately. To put it simply, this immeasurable sword contains too much knowledge that your fourth dimension has never come into contact with. For example, after you execute the immeasurable sword, you will immediately enter the realm of emptiness. This realm of emptiness is actually a special kind of space. And this kind of space is an independent space that doesn't exist in the fourth dimension. To put it simply, even if the fourth dimension is annihilated, you can temporarily survive as long as you enter the realm of emptiness. Yi Xian was stunned and then he said, then as long as I enter the realm of emptiness, won't I be invincible? Lian Qian said indifferently, can you stay in that space forever? Yi Xian shook his head. If he entered the realm of emptiness now, he could maintain it for an hour at most. Lian Qian said, previously you used sword domain, bloodline power and immeasurable sword. You didn't use the Dao laws of space or the great Dao laws. Now try adding these two. Of course, don't use your bloodline power. He finally understood. Yi Xian's bloodline power was an existence that cheated. Of course, although this bloodline was powerful, it would also backfire. After all, if the Azura world hadn't forcefully suppressed him just now, he would have absolutely been unable to awaken. Yi Xian nodded when he heard Lian Qian, and then he slowly closed his eyes. It didn't take long for the spatial Dao laws and great Dao laws to appear between his brows. Bang! In an instant, the boundless energy of the earth veins in the surroundings converged towards him. Moreover, the space around him had started to gradually tremble as well. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. A sword had suddenly appeared in the distant horizon, and there was a blood-red prisoner character on top of the sword. At the same time, a strand of mysterious energy had enveloped the surroundings. Sword domain, immeasurable sword, mantra of the 6 syllables, great Dao laws, spatial Dao laws. It could be said that the might of this sword strike of his wasn't inferior to the might of his bloodline power. Moreover, if he were to utilize his bloodline power as well, then its might would be even more terrifying. It was very strong. However, Yi Xian was very well aware that while this sword strike was very strong, it wasn't his true strength. This was a sword strike that had been constructed from all sorts of external objects. Yi Xian turned to look at Lian Qian and was about to speak. Suddenly, the sky split open and a bolt of lightning descended. This bolt of lightning arrived directly above Yi Xian and Lian Qian. Yi Xian and Lian Qian looked up and saw a middle-aged man standing within the bolt of lightning. The middle-aged man looked down at Yi Xian. I'm here to tell you that we've lost our patience. You and that woman behind you must die. P.S. Let's see if everyone can snatch another red packet. Give more this time. Chapter 844. Lost patience. Yi Xian was silent. He knew that the person in front of him came from the fifth dimension and was not the real body. It should be a clone or an image. Lost patience. The opponent not only wanted to attack him, but also the plain-dressed woman. Yi Xian looked at the man. You guys can do it. After saying that, he turned and left. The man looked at Yi Xian coldly. Four-dimensional ant. As soon as he said that, his body gradually became illusory. Contempt. The look in the man's eyes was like that of a god looking down at ants on the ground. Arrogant. In fact, compared to the fifth dimension, the fourth dimension was really weak. In the eyes of the fifth dimension's experts, the fourth dimension was a group of barbarians without intelligence. However, they also admitted that there were powerful people in the fourth dimension. For example, the plain-dressed woman. They had already suffered a loss against the plain-dressed woman. Why did they suffer a loss? Because they were careless and did not understand. Now they had a rough estimate of the plain-dressed woman's strength. They were now confident. The man looked to his right, which was the direction of the sword world. Unfortunately, they had lost the sword sect as a chess piece. Without the sword sect as a spy, it would affect them quite a bit. Of course, the Shura Empress's appearance was something they did not expect. They naturally did not dare to find the Shura Empress, but Zhou Xian and the others had no scruples. The man threw a cold glance in the direction where Zhou Xian had left. Soon he disappeared completely. In the distance, Zhou Xian slowly walked away. Beside him, Lian Qian softly said, "They should be making a big move. Not only against you but also against the plain-dressed woman." Zhou Xian asked, "Will she be in danger?" Lian Qian solemnly said, "You should be asking if they will be in danger." Zhou Xian stopped and looked at Lian Qian. Lian Qian softly said, "Even if Master was still alive, I'm afraid he would not be able to kill her. That woman was so powerful that she could not be reasoned with." Zhou Xian was slightly puzzled. Then why are they still looking for her? Lian Qian bitterly smiled. Because they do not know her true strength, or in other words, they miscalculated her strength. When she spoke up to hear, she paused for a moment and said, "Actually, even I don't know her true strength." Zhou Xian nodded. "In other words, she will not be in danger. The one who will be in danger is me." Lian Qian nodded. "Yes." Lian Qian nodded. "Yes." Lian Qian was about to speak when Minister Chen walked over. He stopped in front of Zhou Xian and smiled. "My young friend, the sword you wanted." Saying this, he handed a storage ring to Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian glanced at the storage ring. There were 30 swords in total. Of Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian was rather shocked. Although these swords were not as good as the Retribution Heaven Sword Realm Soul Suppressing Sword, they could be said to be the best swords in this world. They would be of great help to him. "Thank you." Elder Chen smiled. "No problem. If you need anything, just let me know." Grand Elder Chen smiled and said, "It's no big deal. If you need anything, just let me know." Elder Chen smiled. "Don't mention it. If you need anything, just let me know." Pavilion Elder Chen said, "Young friend, don't stand on ceremony. If it's within my capabilities, this old man will definitely not decline." Saying this, he glanced at Lian Qian. "I will not disturb you too." Saying this, he retreated. Lian Qian asked softly, "You want to break through to the life realm?" Zhou Xian nodded. "My cultivation level is not high enough." Lian Qian shook her head. Zhou Xian was puzzled. "Why?" Lian Qian said, "You are too eager to break through. Haste makes waste and it will ruin your progress." Zhou Xian asked solemnly, "Then what should I do?" Lian Qian thought for a moment and said, "Change the method." Zhou Xian asked, "What method?" Lian Qian smiled. "Fight." Zhou Xian frowned. "Fight." Lian Qian nodded. "Fight is the easiest way to stimulate one's potential. You need to fight to the death." Zhou Xian asked, "Who do you want to fight?" Lian Qian thought for a moment and said, "The experts of the five-dimensional universe." Zhou Xian hesitated for a moment and said, "Will I be killed?" Lian Qian nodded. "Maybe." Zhou Xian was speechless. Lian Qian looked at Zhou Xian. "Are you afraid?" Zhou Xian shook his head. "I'm not afraid, but," Lian Qian suddenly said, "No buts. Let's go." Saying this, she walked into the distance. Zhou Xian hesitated for a moment, but then he also followed. He knew that Lian Qian would not let him die for nothing. Not long after, Lian Qian brought Zhou Xian to a starry sky. Above them was the five-dimensional barrier. Besides the barrier, there were also some floating corpses. In fact, Zhou Xian wanted to take these corpses and refine them into demonic corpses. However, he was a little worried. It was not because he was benevolent, but because he was afraid that these people were not completely dead. If these people were not completely dead, it would be a little embarrassing if he went to attack their corpses. At this time, Lian Qian suddenly said, "Do you see the five-dimensional barrier?" Zhou Xian looked at the five-dimensional barrier and nodded. "What is it?" Lian Qian said softly, "Go." Zhou Xian hesitated. "Really?" Lian Qian nodded. "Really?" Zhou Xian thought for a moment and then turned into a sword light that soared into the sky. He did not hold back and directly used the immeasurable sword. Just as he was in the sky, a black lightning suddenly fell from the barrier. It was extremely fast and in the blink of an eye, It struck the sword light. Rumble. Following the sound of an explosion, a figure fell from the sky. Soon this figure crashed beside Xianxia. It was Zhou Xian. At this time Zhou Xian's whole body was pitch black and he could not stop trembling. On his body there were dense cracks. That strike just now had directly shattered his body. Although it was not completely destroyed, it was almost there. At the side, Xianxia looked at Zhou Xian with an expressionless face. The corner of Zhou Xian's mouth twitched. Miss Xianxia, Xianxia asked, how does it feel? Zhou Xian smiled bitterly. Feels like dying is better than living. That attack just now had almost destroyed his physical body. His invincible sword physique could not even withstand a single blow from that lightning. Xianxia suddenly said, defeat it. Zhou Xian looked at Xianxia. Defeat that lightning? Xianxia nodded. Zhou Xian said in a deep voice, that's not possible. Just now he did not hold back, but he was killed in a second. What was the point of fighting? Xianxia looked at Zhou Xian. You have to understand that the enemies you will face in the future are many times stronger than this lightning. When you go to the 5th dimension, you are destined to challenge those of a higher level. And now, you must train to have the ability to challenge those of a higher level. Zhou Xian was silent. Xianxia said again, moreover, it is not that you cannot defeat that lightning, but your method is wrong. Zhou Xian frowned. Method? Xianxia nodded. You should not take it head-on. Zhou Xian said in a deep voice, please enlighten me. Xianxia said, you must learn to avoid its sharpness, find its flaws and kill it in one strike. Saying this, she looked at Zhou Xian. In short, I don't care what method you use, you must defeat it. Zhou Xian was silent for a moment, then nodded. I will try. Xianxia shook her head. Not try, but try your best. Do your best. Understand? Zhou Xian nodded. Do your best. Xianxia said. Heal your injuries, then continue. Zhou Xian took a deep breath. He took out some spring of life and began to absorb it. He looked at the black lightning above his head, still floating in the air. He had to admit that this black lightning was really terrifying. In his opinion, he would need to use the power of his bloodline sword domain, and the 6 paths of truth to have a chance of fighting against this black lightning. But if he could defeat it like that, what meaning would it have? Zhou Xian slowly closed his eyes. Xianxia must have a deeper meaning for him to defeat the black lightning. It was not just a simple victory. Not far away, Xianxia raised her head and looked at the 5th dimensional barrier above her. Her eyes suddenly became somewhat vacant. Master, where are you? Speak cause and effect. Everything in this world has a cause and an effect. You created us. This is the cause, but where is our effect? Where should we go to find you? Chapter 845. Prophet of the 5th dimension. Xianxia was very clear that whether it was the 5th dimension or the 4th dimension, no one could kill a prophet. As long as he did not want to die, absolutely no one could kill him. Since he would not die, where did he go? After a while, Xianxia shook her head, no longer thinking about this question. The most important thing now was to return to the 5th dimension. Although it was dangerous to return, it meant that there was a greater chance of finding her master. At this time, Xianxia withdrew her thoughts and looked not far away. In the distance, Zhou Xian stood up. Under the restoration of the spring of life, his injuries were recovering extremely quickly. Zhou Xian raised his head and looked at the black lightning. Avoid its sharpness, find its flaw and kill it in one strike. After pondering for a long time, Zhou Xian suddenly slashed upwards and a sword chi pierced through the air. However, before this sword chi could approach the black lightning, it disappeared without a trace. At this time, the black lightning suddenly fell from the sky at an extremely fast speed, so fast that Zhou Xian's scalp went numb. Without any hesitation, he turned around and ran. His speed was also very fast, and in the blink of an eye, he disappeared into the horizon. Xianxia, Zhou Xian's aura disappeared, and the black lightning paused in the air for a moment before returning to its original position. Seeing that the black lightning did not chase after him, Zhou Xian stopped. At this time, Xianxia appeared beside him and Zhou Xian smiled awkwardly. Xianxia looked at Zhou Xian. You continue. Zhou Xian nodded. He looked at the black lightning and his brows deeply wrinkled. The power of this black lightning far exceeded his, and it was impossible to resist it head-on. However, if he did not resist it head-on, how could he win? At this time, Xianxia suddenly took out a piece of wood that was as long as an arm. She looked at Yi Xian. This piece of wood, where do you think is the easiest to break? Yi Xian said, naturally, the middle. Saying this, he was stunned. The middle. At this moment he suddenly understood. Flaw. When facing an enemy, if he could find the opponent's flaw, wouldn't it be twice the result with half the effort? The answer was naturally. Yi Xian looked up at the black lightning. What was the flaw of this black lightning? Lian Qian asked, do you know what the realm of ordinary swordsman is? Yi Xian looked at Lian Qian. Lian Qian said softly, the so-called ordinary sword is actually the essence, seeing through the essence. Just like this piece of wood in my hand, you said that it would break easily if you used force from the middle. That's true, but if we look further and more thoroughly, you'll realize that if you use fire, it would actually be easier to destroy it. Of course, the difference in strength is too great. Fighting the weak with the strong, you can use any kind of strength. But in order to defeat the strong, you have to find a way to use your strengths to attack the opponent's weaknesses. As she spoke, she looked at the wooden stick in her hand. Everything in this world has its counter. For example, if an ordinary person wanted to break this piece of wood in my hand, it would not be easy, so they would choose to use knives, saws, axes, or fire. Yi Xian was silent. Lian Qian continued, you're fighting someone stronger than you. The gap in strength is huge. If you still insist on fighting head-on, that would be foolish. Do you understand? Yi Xian nodded. I understand. Lian Qian continued, the so-called ordinary sword refers to the essence of all things. It's not easy to see through the essence of all things, but you have to walk in this direction. Yi Xian suddenly asked, is the sword of the plain-dressed woman an ordinary sword? More than that. Lian Qian said in a deep voice, she's definitely far more than the mortal realm. As to what level she's reached, I don't know and I can't evaluate because I'm not qualified. Yi Xian nodded slightly. I understand. After saying that, he looked up at the black divine thunder in the sky. How could he defeat this black divine thunder? Yi Xian fell into deep thought. Flaws. He knew that he had to find flaws, but flaws were not that easy to find. Lian Qian glanced at Yi Xian but did not say anything. Yi Xian had to rely on himself. At this moment, Yi Xian's eyes suddenly lit up. Got it. Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian suddenly disappeared, and when he reappeared, he was already in the sky. At this moment, the lightning suddenly fell. However, at this moment, Yi Xian disappeared. He entered the emptiness realm. The lightning suddenly stopped in the air because it had lost its target. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly appeared behind the lightning, and at the same time he slashed at the lightning with his sword. Boom! The lightning shook violently and Yi Xian was directly sent flying. However, as soon as he flew out, he disappeared. He entered the emptiness realm again. The lightning was stunned. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly appeared above its head and stabbed down with his sword again. Boom! The lightning shook violently and countless bolts of lightning shook the surroundings. Yi Xian was sent flying again, but just like before, he entered the emptiness realm again. The lightning was silent for a moment. Suddenly, it shook violently and an expanse of lightning erupted. In an instant, the entire sky was turned into nothingness. Yi Xian was right beside that bolt of lightning. At this moment, he was rather shocked because he noticed that the energy of that bolt of lightning didn't cause any substantial harm to him. Of course, he was still affected by the shattering of this space. However, with his physical body, it was practically not affected at all. In other words, so long as he entered the emptiness realm, he would be invincible during this period of time. At this moment, he truly realized how terrifying the boundless sword was. This sword technique was meant for assassins. Of course, he could only execute the boundless sword 3 times in a short period of time. In other words, he could only enter the emptiness realm 3 times in a short period of time. Now, he didn't choose to attack again. Instead, he retreated to the side and started to recuperate. Not far away, the lightning was still wreaking havoc. It was obvious that it was very irritable. Just like that, the lightning continued for about an hour before it finally stopped. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly appeared in front of it again. The lightning instantly shook violently and an expanse of lightning shook. However, Yi Xian disappeared again. The lightning shook in the starry sky, and the entire starry sky directly trembled. Below, Lian Qian shook her head and smiled. She knew what method Yi Xian was using. Grind. I can't beat you, but I will grind you to death. Needless to say, this was also a method. In this way, Yi Xian grinded it bit by bit. During this period he was still very careful because the power of the lightning was too strong. It was not something that he could withstand. Therefore he could only rely on grinding, not brute force. In the past, when he fought with others, he relied on the executing heaven sword in his hand and his strong physical body to fight head-on. But now he was fighting the strong as the weak, so he could not use brute force. And now, the lightning was being ground down by him until it became more and more irritable. While Zhou Xian was cultivating in an unknown area, a woman was slowly walking in the void. The woman had a head of silver-white hair, a petite figure and a calm but indifferent gaze. After an unknown amount of time she suddenly stopped. At this moment 3 old men suddenly appeared in front of the woman. The 3 old men hurriedly knelt down and the leading old man said in a trembling voice, "Master, you've returned." The woman slowly closed her eyes. "Tell me about the current 5th dimension." The old man said in a deep voice, "Since the prophet disappeared, the order of the 5th dimension has suddenly become chaotic. Although that person from the heaven domain is still there, Master also knows that without the prophet's support, she does not have the ability to rule the 5th dimension." Saying this, he paused and then said, "As far as we know, these years she has been frantically searching for the prophet, but there is not the slightest clue." After a moment of silence, the woman said, "What is her current strength?" The old man shook his head. "No one knows because she has not appeared for a very long time." The woman nodded. "Continue." The old man said, "Besides her, the master of the southern sky dome realm, Xianxia, is also searching for the prophet. She is even crazier. In order to find the prophet, she has already entered the unknown void dimension and has not returned." Void dimension. Hearing this, the woman's eyes narrowed. That was an unknown dimension. In history, only one person had entered and returned. That was the prophet. After he came out, he smiled and said, "The world is really mysterious." The woman said, "What about the Myriad Dimensional Academy?" The old man said, "At first, after the prophet disappeared, they searched for him. But later, the new master of the Myriad Dimensional Academy, Xianxia, stopped searching. Instead, he started searching for the world prison pagoda that the prophet once left. However, the female teacher of the Myriad Dimensional Academy is still searching." Female teacher. Hearing this, the woman looked at the old man. "What realm is she now?" The old man shook his head. "I don't know. The last time she appeared was 1,000 years ago. At that time she appeared in the Immortal residence forest where the prophet once lived. At that time she was riding a little donkey and holding a scroll." After a moment of silence, the woman said softly, "She still can't let it go." The old man hesitated before asking, "This subordinate doesn't understand why she is so persistent in searching for the prophet." The woman said, "When she was 6 years old, her parents discovered that she was born with a missing soul and a physical body. Moreover, she was mentally deficient and could not cultivate for the rest of her life. Then she was abandoned in a mass grave and left to fend for herself. It was the prophet who passed by and took her away. Although her soul was missing, she was the most accomplished person under the prophet. She liked to fight. The current master of the Myriad Dimensional Academy would not be that Xianxia." The old man nodded slightly. This female teacher's prestige in the Myriad Dimensional Academy was very high. No, it should be said that her prestige in the entire 5th dimension was very high. This was because she did not fight and was kind to others. At this time, the old man suddenly said, "Master, we already know that the world prison pagoda is in the hands of a youth called Zhou Xian in the 4th dimension." Zhou Xian. The woman's eyes suddenly flickered. "I know." The old man said in a deep voice, "Xianxia is preparing to make a move. It is said that his target is not only that youth Zhou Xian but also a female swordsman. This time they are prepared to do it for real." At this point he paused before saying, "Master, this pagoda can open the all-creation book house. Therefore this subordinate made the decision to send people there. As long as Xianxia makes a move against that female swordsman, our people will make a move against Zhou Xian." At that time, the woman suddenly said, "Let them come back." After saying that, she frowned. That was because she had blurted out this sentence without even thinking about it. It was like an instinct. The old man was somewhat startled. "Master." After a moment of silence, the woman said, "Let them come back." The old man looked at the woman and did not dare to refute. He nodded slightly and quietly retreated. After the old man left, the woman opened her palm and a wooden figure appeared in her hand. Looking at the wooden figure, scenes suddenly appeared in her mind. Wow, brother, do you want to eat fish tonight? It smells so good. Brother, why aren't you eating? Brother has eaten. But my belly is so big. Brother, did you only order a bowl of noodles? Brother, I ate. Look, my belly is so big. Brother, if this illness of mine cannot be cured after I die, put my ashes in a small bamboo tube and keep it by your side. I want to be by your side forever, okay? If it cannot be cured, brother will accompany you in death. But brother does not want you to be alone in the other world. Chapter 846. After a long time, the woman put away the piece of wood in her hand and said softly, "You are a good brother." After saying that, she disappeared on the spot. In the starry sky, there was a tremor of lightning. The surrounding starry sky began to tremble violently under the influence of this tremor of lightning. After a moment of silence, a snow-white sword light suddenly appeared above the head of the lightning. In the next moment, the sword light slashed down in a straight line. Boom. The black lightning trembled violently and then a wave of lightning surged out. The sky shook violently. However, Xian disappeared again. Grind. Xian was now relying on grinding. In fact, although he could not defeat this black lightning, he had gained a lot. Play to his strengths and avoid its weaknesses. Avoid its sharp edges, find its flaws and kill it in one strike. Now he had learned how to play to his strengths and avoid its weaknesses. As for looking for flaws, he had just begun. Looking for flaws was not an easy task. Especially this divine lightning, which seemed to be flawless. However, he knew that there must be a flaw. Beside him, Xianxia looked at Xian, who was constantly grinding the divine lightning in the distance. She was a little surprised because Xian's comprehension was really good. Although he was not a super monster who could understand with a single point, at least he was working hard. Hard work. Her master had once said that innate talent was bestowed by the heavens, but hard work was more important. If one did not work hard, they would be wasting their talent. And Xian was working hard. This continued for about 10 days. Xian could now fight with this black lightning for about an hour. In this hour, he perfectly resolved many of the black lightning's attacks. However, he still found it difficult to counterattack. This was because once he got close to this black lightning, he would have to face it head-on. With his current strength, he was completely unable to do so. After a while, Xian stopped and returned to Xianxian's side. He looked at the divine lightning in the sky. "Miss Xianxian, if I defeat this black lightning, can I directly enter the 5th dimension?" Xianxian looked at Xian. "What are you thinking about?" Xian looked at Xianxian. "What's wrong?" Xianxian said, "This divine lightning is only the 1st stage. You've defeated it, but there's still a 2nd stage, a 3rd stage, a 4th stage, a 5th stage." Xian was speechless. Xianxian continued, "You still have a long way to go, understand?" Xian nodded. "Understood." Xianxian glanced at the godly lightning. "Maybe you can think of another way." With that, she turned around and left. On the spot, Xian was stunned. "Think of another way? Exchange for what?" Xian looked at the divine lightning and pondered for a long time. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and the corners of his lips curled up. He suddenly thought of something. Why did he only use his sword? Thinking of this, Xian shook his head, feeling a little silly. Without thinking too much, he suddenly turned into a beam of sword light and soared into the sky. As soon as Xian made his move, the black lightning in the sky suddenly trembled. Immediately afterward, countless lightning bolts shot out from the sky. At this moment, the space Dao law suddenly appeared between Xian's brows. In the next moment, a blood-red prisoner word suddenly appeared on the lightning bolt. As this word appeared, the lightning bolt was directly covered by a red light. At the same time, a mysterious force enveloped the black lightning. This time the black lightning seemed to sense danger. It trembled violently and terrifying lightning bolts shot out continuously. At this moment Xian suddenly disappeared. He disappeared again. Secretly, Xian was quite excited at this moment. He had not wanted to use the 6 paths of truth, infinite sword and sword domain to kill his opponent. Instead, he wanted to see if his strongest attack could pose a threat to his opponent. However, he had not expected that when his sword domain enveloped his opponent, he would make a new discovery. A flaw. Under the envelopment of his sword domain, he discovered the flaw of the lightning bolt. As soon as the lightning bolt stopped, Xian suddenly appeared above it. In the next moment, his sword domain enveloped the lightning bolt. In the blink of an eye, numerous beams of sword light slashed at the lightning bolt. Bang! Countless bolts of lightning exploded, and Zhou Xian was instantly blasted flying. When he stopped, he immediately looked up at the lightning bolt. At this moment, the lightning bolt had become slightly illusory, but it quickly condensed. Zhou Xian's face instantly sank when he saw this. Right at this moment, the black lightning in the distance suddenly vanished. Zhou Xian's pupils constricted abruptly, and he swiftly raised his sword horizontally to block it. Bang! An expanse of lightning erupted before him, and then he was blasted flying. During the process of his flying, lightning bolts exploded incessantly around him. When Zhou Xian had stopped, countless lightning bolts were shooting at him like a storm in front of him. Zhou Xian was shocked, and he didn't hesitate to enter the emptiness state. Countless bolts of lightning flashed through the starry sky, and it was extremely shocking. This time it continued for around 2 hours before it stopped. Below, Zhou Xian looked at the lightning that covered the starry sky above him, and he felt a lingering fear. He'd sensed that the black lightning had really been infuriated just now. Why had it been infuriated? That was because his sword had injured it. Meanwhile, Xianxia appeared by Zhou Xian's side. She looked at the black lightning and said softly, "That sword strike of yours can be stronger." Zhou Xian looked at Xianxia and she said, "Burst out with speed. You can utilize the spatial Dao laws to enhance your sword strike, allowing your sword strike's speed and strength to reach its limits. Coupled with the characteristics of your sword domain, you can find its weakness and give it a lethal strike. Of course, it's not very possible for you to kill it with your current strength. However, it's already very good." Zhou Xian nodded. When he'd first faced the black lightning, he'd almost been instantly killed by it. But after a month of battle, even though he still couldn't defeat it, he was much better than before. Because he could injure the black lightning now. Moreover, the black lightning couldn't injure him as easily as it had in the beginning. He'd improved too much. Meanwhile, Xianxia suddenly said, "Let it hit you." Zhou Xian was stunned. Xianxia looked at the black lightning and said softly, "This isn't ordinary lightning. If you let it temper your body, not only will your body be greatly strengthened, but you might even gain some special subordinates. For example, you might be immune to lightning in the future." Zhou Xian said in a low voice, "Miss Xianxia, this isn't a joke." Xianxia looked at Zhou Xian and said, "You were blasted by it once, but didn't you survive?" Zhou Xian was speechless. Xianxia said, "This is a superb opportunity to improve your physical body, because your current physical body has already reached an extremely formidable level. If you want to improve it further, then unless you have a great fortuitous encounter, it will be very difficult to do so." Lightning strike. Zhou Xian was a little hesitant. Because he still remembered the first time he'd been struck by lightning. It was really unbearable. It could be said that if he hadn't already attained the sword body, he would have been dead. He still had a lingering fear towards the divine lightning. At this moment, Xianxia said, "The divine lightning can't kill you in one strike. So, if you can get used to the bombardment of the divine lightning, your body will definitely improve to another level. This is a great opportunity for you." Zhou Xian thought about it and nodded. Alright. He only had one thought in his mind, and that was to improve his strength. An hour later, Zhou Xian raised his head to look at the black divine lightning. He had to admit that he was still a little afraid of it. The power of the divine lightning was too strong. Without much hesitation, Zhou Xian transformed into a beam of sword light and shot into the sky. At this moment, the black divine lightning in the sky shook violently and then it fell straight down. When he sensed the power contained in the divine lightning, Zhou Xian's expression changed. To be honest, he wanted to run. However, when he thought of the benefits that the divine lightning would bring him, he decisively abandoned the thought of running. Soon the divine lightning blasted his body. Boom! Zhou Xian instantly fell from the sky, and as he fell, bolts of lightning kept exploding on his body. In the starry sky, Zhou Xian's scream suddenly rang out. Soon Zhou Xian stopped. At this moment, he had already put a very, very long distance between him and the divine lightning. After the divine lightning blasted him away, it did not choose to pursue him, but retreated to its original position. Zhou Xian lay quietly in the starry sky, and his whole body was constantly flashing with lightning. At this moment, he had lost consciousness. His whole body was numb. At this moment, Xianxia appeared beside Zhou Xian. She glanced at Zhou Xian and had to admit that Zhou Xian's body was a little terrible to look at. Without thinking too much, she waved her right hand and a white bottle appeared beside Yi Xian's mouth. The spring of life. After the spring of life entered Yi Xian's body immediately recovered at an extremely fast speed. Just like that, about an hour later, Yi Xian sat up. At this moment his body was still sore and numb, as if all the bones in his body had fallen apart. That kind of feeling was a little sour. Lian Qian glanced at Yi Xian's body and said softly, "It really is useful." Hearing this, Yi Xian was stunned and then said, "Miss Lian Qian, don't tell me that before this, you weren't sure whether it would be useful or not?" Lian Qian nodded. "I guess that it would be useful, but reality has proven that it is." "Yi Xian," Lian Qian said, "come, continue. What you need to do now is to continuously use the divine lightning to temper your body over and over again. In any case, you need to completely adapt to the power of the divine lightning." Yi Xian nodded and he looked up at the black lightning in the sky. Now he was no longer that afraid of the divine lightning. In any case, he couldn't kill him. What was there to be afraid of? After resting for a while, Yi Xian stretched his body, and then he looked up at the divine lightning in the sky and grinned, "Continue." As soon as he said this, he turned into a ray of sword light and shot into the sky. At this moment, the divine lightning in the sky suddenly descended. An instant later, boom. The entire starry sky suddenly trembled. Chapter 847. After a few breaths, Yi Xian lay down again. Just like before, his whole body was covered in injuries. About an hour later, Yi Xian rushed over again. Just like that, Yi Xian used his body to withstand the heavenly lightning again and again, letting the heavenly lightning temper his body. About 10 days later, his body became more and more capable of withstanding. In the beginning, when he was struck by the heavenly thunder, he was almost killed. Although he didn't die, it took him quite a while to stand up. But now, after being struck by the heavenly thunder, he recovered in 15 minutes at most. This proved that his body was becoming more capable of withstanding. However, this was far from enough. Continue. While Yi Xian was bitterly cultivating, Yi Xian and the other four-dimensional experts also came to this part of the starry sky. When they saw Yi Xian using his body to resist the heavenly lightning, they could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. They had been here for so many years, so they naturally knew how terrifying the heavenly lightning was. But they did not expect that Yi Xian would actually use his body to resist the heavenly lightning. How strong was his body? Everyone became more and more afraid of Yi Xian. Just like that, about 2 months later. On this day, Yi Xian suddenly walked in front of the black lightning. The black lightning directly fell and a lightning light instantly submerged Yi Xian. The lightning light dissipated and Yi Xian walked out. At this moment he could completely use his body to resist the black lightning. However, he still could not kill it. The current situation between him and the black lightning was, "You can't kill me and I can't kill you." After its attack failed, the black lightning returned to the sky. Yi Xian raised his head and looked at the black lightning. At this moment the black lightning suddenly trembled violently. Then it suddenly turned into a bolt of lightning and fell straight down. This time Yi Xian still did not dodge. Facing this black lightning, he no longer had any fear. At this moment the aura contained in the black lightning suddenly soared. Yi Xian was startled. Before he could react, the black lightning had already submerged him. Boom. In the blink of an eye, the entire starry sky was covered by black lightning. The entire starry sky flickered with lightning, and it was incomparably terrifying. About a quarter of an hour later, Yi Xian slowly walked out of the lightning. At this moment his body was surrounded by lightning. The black lightning that had struck him had already retreated to the horizon. After a moment of silence, it suddenly disappeared. Seeing this scene, some of the fourth-dimensional experts in the distant starry sky looked at Yi Xian one after another. They knew that Yi Xian had passed the first test. From the fourth dimension to the fifth dimension there were a total of 5 stages. As for this Yi Xian, he could be considered to have passed the first round. However, the subsequent rounds would only get stronger and stronger. At this moment, Lian Qian appeared in front of Yi Xian. She sized up Yi Xian with a look of surprise in her eyes. "Your physical body." When Yi Xian looked at his physical body, he was dumbfounded. Originally, his skin contained countless sword intents and sword chi, but now there was not only sword chi and sword intent but also thunder and lightning. They had already fused with his sword intent and sword chi. Now he not only had a sword body but also a lightning body. Of course, the toughness of his physical body was a level higher than before. Harvest. Yi Xian took a deep breath. The torture during this period of time had not been in vain. Lian Qian said, "Absorb the sword." Yi Xian looked at Lian Qian. She said, "The foundation of your physical body is extremely good. Even if you make another breakthrough, it won't have any negative effects on you." Yi Xian nodded. After saying this, he took out a sword and began to absorb it. As soon as the sword entered his body, a wave of pure energy erupted from his body. However, it disappeared without a trace in an instant. All of it had been absorbed by his body. Yi Xian was stunned. Then he took out another sword and absorbed it. As soon as this sword entered his body, it was completely absorbed. Yi Xian did not stop and took out another sword. Just like that, after about an hour, he had absorbed all 30 swords. When he absorbed the last sword, a powerful aura suddenly swept out from his body. Wherever this aura passed, ripples appeared in the space like waves. He had not broken through yet. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground and slowly closed his eyes. In his body, waves of powerful aura constantly vibrated. Beside him, Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian and did not disturb him. It was not easy to reach the fate state. The so-called fate state was to know one's destiny. He had to rely on himself. Otherwise, he would be stuck at this step for the rest of his life. Fate. The so-called fate referred to fate. At the beginning of chaos, the fate of all living beings seemed to have been predetermined. It was like birth, old age, sickness, and death. Especially death. Since ancient times, who could avoid death? Where there was life, there would be death. This was the law and the fate of all living beings. And because some people became stronger and stronger, they could feel a trace of their own fate. What was his future fate? Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. He was a little confused. Fate. What was the future? From the beginning until now, he knew that he was different from others. Many powerful people knew him. More accurately, they knew him in his previous life. Previous life? What was his previous life? It was still the same question. His previous life was his previous life, and this life was this life. Fate. Yi Xian took a deep breath. My fate is in my own hands. Boom. A powerful aura erupted from his body. This aura was like a wave that shook the surroundings. In the blink of an eye, the entire starry sky trembled violently. Fate state. At this moment, Grand Elder Chen suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. He smiled. Congratulations. Yi Xian opened his eyes and slowly stood up. He clenched his fists and a powerful force gathered in his body. Fate state. At this moment he understood the true meaning of the fate state. The fate state was not about feeling fate but understanding the meaning of fate. Nothing was destined at birth. For example, the lifespan of humans was only a few decades in the beginning. But through cultivation it could be 100 years, a few hundred years, or even a few thousand years. Fate was in one's own hands. Unless one accepted it, it could not decide one's life. Fate state. Yi Xian relaxed his hands, and the aura emitted from his body immediately calmed down. At this moment, Lian Qian suddenly said, "Congratulations." Yi Xian nodded slightly, then looked at Grand Elder Chen. "Is there something I can help you with, Grand Elder?" Grand Elder Chen nodded slightly. "Young friend, I'm afraid your current strength has reached the Dao-breaking realm." "Dao-breaking?" Yi Xian said gravely. "What realm are Emperor Shi and the others at?" "Dao-breaking?" Grand Elder Chen shook his head. "I can only say that they are infinitely close to Dao-breaking. But they have not truly entered the Dao-breaking realm." Yi Xian asked again, "Are there any Dao-breaking experts here?" Grand Elder Chen said gravely, "There are. But very few, only 2. And they haven't appeared for a very, very long time. I don't know if they are still alive." Dao-breaking realm. Yi Xian fell silent. Even in the 4-dimensional universe he still had a long way to go. Yi Xian was about to speak, but at this moment in the distant horizon, the 5-dimensional barrier suddenly trembled violently. Yi Xian and the other 2 hurriedly looked up. Under everyone's gaze, the 5th dimension under everyone's gazes, the talisman characters on the 5-dimensional barrier slowly dissipated. What's going on? Everyone frowned. Lian Qian looked at the 5-dimensional barrier and her pupils constricted. Not good. They're going to destroy the restriction. Destroy the restriction? Yi Xian said gravely. Wasn't this set up by the prophet? How could it be destroyed? Lian Qian stared fixedly at the 5-dimensional barrier. It was done by one of our own. One of our own? Yi Xian frowned. Miss Xianxia, what's the meaning of this? Xianxia said gravely, the Myriad Dimensions Academy. This restriction was set up by Master. If others want to break it, it'll be as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Only our own people can break it. No, not break it but remove it. At this point she took a deep breath. Someone is using the knowledge Master taught them to remove this restriction. Grand Elder Chen said, this is a good thing. Idiot. Xianxia suddenly said angrily, this is a good thing? Do you know what's between the 4-dimensional universe and the 5-dimensional universe? It's a space dimension that you can't cross. Once it's removed, the power of this space dimension will directly devour your 4-dimensional universe. Of course, people like you are strong enough to resist this power, but what about others? Is everyone in the 4-dimensional universe as strong as you? Once this power enters the 4-dimensional universe, not even a blade of grass will grow. Hearing this, Grand Elder Chen was silent. In fact, after cultivating to this point, he might have some compassion in his heart, but right now he couldn't sacrifice himself to help Song Mountain. What did Song Mountain have to do with him? Was it selfish? It wasn't selfish. After all, they didn't have the obligation to save the world. In the starry sky, the runes became fewer and fewer. Around them, more and more people appeared. Emperor Shi and Daoist mountain ghost also appeared. At this time, many people were excited because they discovered that the restriction was becoming weaker and weaker. Once it disappeared completely, it meant that they could enter the 5-dimensional universe. At this time, only a blood-red rune was left in the sky. The rune just floated there and the barrier had completely disappeared. In the field, someone suddenly said, break this rune and you can directly enter the 5-dimensional universe. Hearing this, everyone looked at the blood-red rune. At this time, Xianxia suddenly said, no. Everyone looked at Xianxia and she said in a low voice, if you break this rune, you can enter the 5-dimensional universe. However, if you break this rune, the power of the spatial dimension will enter the 4-dimensional universe. At that time your universe will be destroyed. In the distance, a middle-aged man said indifferently, what does this have to do with us? Xianxia looked at the middle-aged man and didn't say anything. She knew that these people wouldn't sacrifice their future for the living beings of the 4-dimensional universe. This was human nature. She didn't have the qualifications to stand on the moral high ground and criticize them. At this time, a middle-aged man suddenly rushed into the sky. Immediately, a powerful force directly blasted the blood-red rune. Boom! The blood-red rune instantly shattered and the space there suddenly split open. At this time, a middle-aged man in white appeared in everyone's line of sight. Xianxia, who was beside Yi Xian, suddenly said in a low voice, the current schoolmaster of the Myriad Dimensions Academy. The middle-aged man smiled. If everyone wants to enter the 5-dimensional universe, there's one more thing you have to do. After saying this, he looked at Yi Xian below. Kill him and use his head to exchange for a pass to the 5-dimensional universe. P.S. I'll give everyone another red packet. Remember to snatch it. Chapter 848. Kill Yi Xian. All the spectators were stunned when they heard this. Kill Yi Xian in exchange for a pass. Soon the expressions of many people became extremely unsightly. Kill with a borrowed knife. This expert from the 5th dimension wanted to borrow their hands to kill Yi Xian. In other words, he wanted them to fight with Yi Xian. Those who had lived to this age naturally understood Chen Tian's intentions. Not far away, Yi Xian looked at Chen Tian. It seems that your real target is me. Chen Tian sized up Yi Xian and smiled. Of course it's you. Yi Xian opened his palm and the World Prison Pagoda appeared in his hand. You want it? Saying this, he suddenly put it away and grinned. I'm not giving it to you. Chen Tian was not angry. He smiled. It's fine, I can get it myself. Saying this, he looked at the experts from the 4th dimension. This is your only chance in this lifetime. As long as you kill him, I can let you enter the 5th dimension. Kill Yi Xian. Everyone was silent. If Yi Xian was easy to kill, they would definitely not hesitate. However, was Yi Xian easy to kill? The problem was that he was not easy to kill. Moreover, could this person's words be trusted? What if they fought with Yi Xian and both sides were injured? What if he refused to let them enter? Wouldn't that be stupid? At this time, Daoist Mountain Ghost suddenly said, Your Excellency, we just want to enter the 5th dimension, that's all. Chen Tian looked at Daoist Mountain Ghost and smiled. But you were born in the 4th dimension. Daoist mountain ghost asked, "Can't we go to the fifth dimension if we were born in the fourth dimension?" Qin Tian shook his head and smiled. "That's not it. It's just that I was the one who broke teacher's restriction, so I have the right to decide who can enter or not, right?" Daoist mountain ghost still wanted to say something, but Qin Tian said, "I don't have much time, so you better not waste it. Otherwise you will regret it later." Daoist mountain ghost fell silent. Everyone else was silent as well. In the air, Qin Tian looked at Zhou Xian and smiled. "As long as one is alive, it's fine to not be strong. However, one must know one's own limits. What kind of strength you have, what kind of things you should have. If you overestimate yourself, your ending won't be too good." Zhou Xian smiled and said, "If I give you the pagoda, will you let us go?" Qin Tian laughed. "You won't, because you are a swordsman. A swordsman's sword can be broken, but it cannot be bent. Therefore you would never beg for life in this way. I also advise you not to think of playing any tricks. In the face of absolute power, all conspiracies and schemes are useless." Zhou Xian smiled. "Why don't you go look for her first?" The she was naturally the woman in a plain dress. Qin Tian laughed and said, "Because you are easier to kill." Zhou Xian fell silent. These fellows weren't stupid. They knew how to fight first. At this moment, Qin Tian looked at Daoist mountain ghost and the others who were not far away. "Have you thought it through?" Daoist mountain ghost looked at Qin Tian. "Do you think we are idiots? No one would attack Zhou Xian. Firstly, Zhou Xian was not easy to kill. Secondly, even if they killed Zhou Xian, Qin Tian might not let them enter the fifth dimension. It was very stupid to pin their hopes on other people's pity." In the air, Qin Tian smiled slightly. "Very good." As he said that, he spread out his palm and pressed down lightly. The space behind him suddenly split open, and soon, an extremely powerful aura spread out from behind him. The expressions of everyone in the surroundings changed when they sensed this force. Dimensional power. This was not something the four-dimensional universe could withstand. In the distance, Daoist mountain ghost stared at Qin Tian. "You want to destroy the four-dimensional universe?" "Me?" Qin Tian shook his head and smiled. "Are you kidding me? You should know that it was you who destroyed the last restriction rune. Therefore you are the ones who want to destroy your universe." As his voice fell, a black gas spread out from behind him. Everywhere this black gas passed, space turned into nothingness and disappeared completely. Sensing the power of this black gas, everyone's expression became extremely ugly. If this endless black gas was allowed to enter the four-dimensional universe, the entire four-dimensional universe would really be devoured. In the air, Qin Tian looked down at everyone and smiled. "Are you afraid?" As he said that, he looked at Zhou Xian. "Zhou Xian, I can give you a chance. If you hand over the pagoda, then your ancestors." Zhou Xian suddenly shouted angrily. In the next moment, a light soared into the sky and slashed at Qin Tian. In the air, Qin Tian narrowed his eyes and punched out. Bang! A few dozen feet in front of his fist, the sword light was forced to stop. And at this moment, a blood-red prisoner character appeared above Qin Tian's head. Sensing this, Qin Tian's pupils shrank. Immediately after, he turned around and disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already thousands of feet away. Qin Tian stared at Zhou Xian with a sinister expression. That Xiao Ta actually recognized you as his master. Zhou Xian ignored Qin Tian and turned to look at Daoist mountain ghost and the others. "Everyone, we want to go to the fifth dimension, but we will not go in kneeling. Go in kneeling." Hearing Zhou Xian's words, the blood of the four-dimensional experts started boiling. They were all people who had cultivated for tens of thousands of years. How could they not have any self-respect? How could they not have any backbone? Yes, everyone wanted to go to the fifth dimension. They all wanted to break through and live forever. But not by kneeling down and begging for it. It was good for people to live, but if they did not have dignity and backbone, then they might as well be dogs. At this time, Daoist mountain ghost suddenly said softly, "Little friend Zhou Xian is right. As a person we must have some dignity and backbone." As he said this, he looked at Qin Tian. "We, the people of the fourth dimension, are indeed not as strong as the experts of the fifth dimension. However, we don't need your charity, nor do we need your pity." Qin Tian laughed. "You have a backbone. Unfortunately, what's the use? Your four-dimensional universe is about to be destroyed. Isn't that right?" Daoist mountain ghost laughed. "Today the old man will protect the four-dimensional universe. Not for anything else but to fight for pride. Of course the old man really doesn't like you. As his voice fell, he suddenly turned into a black light and soared into the sky. In the starry sky, he clenched his right hand and pressed it down. He roared, "Sky supporting pillar." Boom. A huge black hand that was a few hundred meters long suddenly tore through the space above his head, and then the huge hand directly grabbed the black aura. However, as soon as it came into contact with the black aura, the huge hand started to turn illusory. Seeing this, Daoist mountain ghost's expression suddenly became serious. The black gas was stronger than he had imagined. At this time, Emperor Shi, who was not far away, suddenly looked at Xianxia and laughed. Are the people of the fifth dimension superior to the people of the fourth dimension? I also don't like you. As his voice fell, he suddenly stomped his right foot. Boom. A powerful white beam of light soared into the sky. This white light directly collided with the black gas. Rumble. In the starry sky, the black gas trembled violently. However, this white light was unable to stop them. In the sky, Qin Tian looked down at Emperor Shi and Daoist mountain ghost. He laughed. You don't want to take the road to life, but you insist on taking the road to death. Just because of your so-called backbone and dignity, how ridiculous. As he said this, he looked at Zhou Xian. Just as he was about to speak, Zhou Xian suddenly disappeared. A wisp of sword light tore through the battlefield. Qin Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. Hiss. Before he could finish speaking, a blood-red prisoner character suddenly appeared above his head. At the same time, a mysterious force enveloped him. Sword domain. Qin Tian's expression was calm. He clenched his fists tightly. Boom. The blood-red prisoner character above his head directly became illusory. At the same time, the sword light in front of him was forced to stop. Qin Tian stared at Zhou Xian. The sword is a good sword and the divine skill is a good divine skill. Unfortunately, in my eyes, you are too weak. As his voice fell, he fiercely punched out. Boom. Zhou Xian instantly appeared tens of thousands of feet away. As soon as he stopped, the space within thousands of feet behind him directly exploded, turning into nothingness. Qin Tian frowned slightly. Your physical body. He did not expect that Zhou Xian would be able to withstand his attack. In the distance, Zhou Xian stretched his muscles and then looked at the distant Daoist mountain ghost. At this moment, Daoist mountain ghost suddenly said, "Little friend Zhou Xian, we can't hold on any longer." Zhou Xian looked at the black gas. The black gas was increasing in number. Daoist mountain ghost and Emperor Shi could no longer hold on. After pondering for a moment, Zhou Xian looked at Pavilion Elder Qin and the others below. Everyone, if the nest is overturned, how can the eggs remain unbroken? We are now people on the same boat. We will prosper together, and if we suffer together, we will suffer together. Only by joining forces can we survive. At this moment, Qin Tian, who was not far away, suddenly laughed. No, we are only targeting you, not them. Hearing this, the fourth dimension experts suddenly hesitated. At this moment, Pavilion Elder Qin suddenly stood up. Everyone, little friend Yi is right. If the nest is overturned, how can the eggs remain unbroken? If we do not help Daoist mountain ghost and little friend Yi now, in the future we will find that no one will help us. Moreover, at this point he looked at Qin Tian and laughed sinisterly. Moreover, the old man is also very unhappy with this person. Fight with him. Let them know that the people of the fourth dimension are not ants. We are not people that they can bully as they please. As his voice fell, he directly turned into a beam of white light and soared into the sky. Behind Pavilion Elder Qin, Qin Shi and more than 20 top experts of the fourth dimension attacked one after another. Boom boom boom. In the starry sky, as Pavilion Elder Qin and the others attacked one after another, the speed at which the black gas spread instantly slowed down. However, it did not stop. Instead, the black gas increased in number. In the distance, Qin Tian was silent. He had originally wanted to use the experts of the fourth dimension to target Zhou Xian, but he did not expect that these people would choose not to. Moreover, these people had come to oppose him. He had to admit that he had underestimated the people of the fourth dimension. Recollecting his thoughts, Qin Tian looked at Zhou Xian, who was not far away. I don't want to waste time. Aren't you a swordsman? Then I will let you die under my sword. As his voice fell, a sword suddenly appeared in his hand. The next moment, this sword suddenly flew out and slashed at Zhou Xian. The moment this sword appeared, Lian Qian's horrified voice suddenly rang in Zhou Xian's mind. Not good, this is the fifth dimension's third sword. It is not something you can resist. At this point she suddenly stopped. Had Yi Xian ever been afraid of a sword? At this moment Yi Xian's expression suddenly changed. His face was filled with terror as if he had been shocked to the extreme. Seeing this, Qin Tian smiled. Chapter 849. A sword descended in a straight line through the starry sky. The sword was completely snow-white and there was a speck of blood red at its tip. It was like a plum blossom in the snow, and it carried a trace of coldness amidst its beauty. Yi Xian seemed to be extremely terrified as he watched the sword descend. The expressions of Daoist Mountain Ghost and the others instantly became unsightly when they saw the expression on Yi Xian's face. They could be said to be one with Yi Xian, so they naturally didn't want anything to happen to Yi Xian. Because if something were to happen to Yi Xian, then it was equivalent to losing a formidable ally. But now it seemed like something bad was about to happen. Meanwhile, the sword had arrived above Yi Xian. It was very calm and didn't emanate any energy fluctuations, but everyone knew that it couldn't be ordinary. But right at this moment, Qin Tian's expression suddenly changed. Because he noticed that while Yi Xian had a terrified expression on his face, Yi Xian showed no signs of fleeing or counterattacking. Something's not right. Qin Tian didn't hesitate to withdraw the sword. However, Yi Xian suddenly shot into the sky. He was extremely swift and collided with the sword, and then the sword instantly pierced through his head and into his body. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned when they witnessed this scene. What's Yi Xian trying to do? Qin Tian was slightly stunned as well. He hadn't expected that Yi Xian would actually do this. Is he giving his life away? Right at this moment his pupils constricted. Because he noticed that Yi Xian was completely fine after the sword pierced into Yi Xian's body. Moreover, Yi Xian's aura had grown even stronger. What the hell is going on? Qin Tian stared fixedly at Yi Xian, and his intuition told him that he might have done something extremely stupid. Yi Xian greedily took a deep breath and his aura rose explosively. This time he didn't suppress it. He couldn't. Because the power contained within this sword was too terrifying. It was more terrifying than any sword he had absorbed before. It could be said that this sword was infinitely close to his executing heaven sword and soul-suppressing sword. He had to break through. Yi Xian was shocked. Breaking through at this time? Wasn't that asking for death? Qin Tian also noticed that Yi Xian was about to break through because Yi Xian's aura was still rising crazily. Qin Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He was just about to attack when Yi Xian suddenly said, "Qin Tian, you old dog. You're not human." Everyone, Qin Tian looked at Yi Xian. What? Do you want to have a civil battle with me? Yi Xian said angrily. Qin Tian. At this time, Qin Tian suddenly interrupted Yi Xian. You're trying to buy time. That's a good idea. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished and a powerful force swept down from the sky. Everywhere this force passed, space was instantly reduced to ashes. In front of Qin Tian, the four-dimensional space was as fragile as rotten wood. Yi Xian's face instantly sank when he saw this. He was about to break through now, so how could he resist? Right at this moment, a woman suddenly appeared in front of him. Yi Xian was stunned when he saw this person. Xianxia. Xianxia stared fixedly at Qin Tian, who was charging down. Break through quickly. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly transformed into a spear light that shot into the sky, and her spear was like a thunderclap that carried the might to pierce through the sky. Yi Xian didn't think too much about it and hurriedly sat down cross-legged. Breakthrough. He had to break through as soon as possible. In midair, Qin Tian watched Xianxia charge at him with an expressionless face, and he smashed his fist against the spear in Xianxia's hand. Boom. The spear light in Xianxia's hand instantly exploded, and at the same time Xianxia instantly retreated. Because her retreat speed was too fast, her body directly tore through space, and fresh blood unceasingly flowed out of her mouth. Qin Tian's strength was too great, and it wasn't something her body could withstand. Qin Tian didn't care about Xianxia, and he directly charged towards Yi Xian below. Compared to Xianxia, he wanted to get rid of Yi Xian even more. Because Yi Xian had given him too many surprises. Just as Qin Tian appeared above Yi Xian's head, a man suddenly blocked in front of Yi Xian. Wuxia. Wuxia looked up at Qin Tian, who was hovering above his head. Suddenly he let out an enraged roar and charged directly toward Qin Tian. As he did, the illusory image of an old man appeared behind him. This illusory image was even more solid and powerful than before. Clearly, in this period of time, Wuxia's strength had greatly increased. In the air, Qin Tian glanced at Wuxia and he stomped down with his foot. Boom! The phantom instantly exploded and Wuxia's entire body fell from the sky. As he fell, his body cracked open layer by layer and fresh blood spurted out. Qin Tian looked down at Zhou Xian. He was just about to attack again when a sword light suddenly appeared behind him. The speed of this sword was faster than lightning. Qin Tian's brows creased slightly and he turned around and punched out. Rumble. At the point where the fist and sword met, a powerful force suddenly exploded out, and a petite figure retreated explosively in the starry sky. This person was Xiaoqi. Xiaoqi retreated a few thousand meters before stopping. However, the moment she stopped, she raised her sword above her head with both hands. She stared at the distant Qin Tian, and her sword suddenly slashed downwards. Heaven-breaking sword. A strand of sword light shot out from the tip of Xiaoqi's sword. The starry sky was torn apart. This sword, like its name, could break the heavens. In the distance, Qin Tian was expressionless. Just as the sword energy was about to slash his body suddenly became illusory, and then the sword energy mysteriously disappeared. On the other side, Xiaoqi's expression suddenly changed and she suddenly turned around. Instant sword. Just as she finished speaking, her body disappeared like a ray of light. Chi-chi-chi-chi-chi-chi-chi-wrong. The space in front of her was suddenly torn apart by countless sword lights. In less than half a breath's time, the space was directly torn apart by thousands of sword lights, and these sword lights appeared almost at the same time. In fact, it wasn't just one sword instant but 1,000 swords instant. In an instant, 1,000 swords appeared. Meanwhile, the space that was enveloped by the rays of light suddenly exploded apart. Rumble. A figure rapidly retreated in the starry sky. It was Xiaoqi. Xiaoqi suddenly held her sword vertically between her eyebrows. Protect. As soon as she finished speaking, strands of sword qi suddenly appeared behind her. These strands of sword qi instantly formed a sword shield behind her, and it didn't take long for her to stop. However, a trace of blood seeped out from the corner of her mouth. In that pitch-black space, Qin Tian walked out. He stared at Xiaoqi and there were actually 3 sword scars on his face. At this moment he had to admit that although the overall strength of the 4th dimension was far inferior to the 5th dimension, there were still many people in the 4th dimension who were very outstanding. Whether it was Zhou Xian just now or these 3 people who just appeared, even in the 5th dimension they were all at the peak. Especially this little girl in front of him. The strength of her sword Dao had exceeded his expectations. At this moment Xiaoqi, Wuxia and Xianxia all arrived beside Zhou Xian. Although Wuxia's injuries were more serious, fortunately he had the spring of life so it wasn't fatal. Xiaoqi glanced at Zhou Xian below. He still needs an hour. An hour. In other words, they had to stop Qin Tian for an hour. In the distance, Qin Tian glanced at Xiaoqi's group of 3. It's time to end this. In the next moment he suddenly vanished. Xiaoqi's group of 3's expressions instantly changed. They were just about to attack when Zhou Xian suddenly appeared in front of them. They were stunned when they saw Zhou Xian. He broke through. In next to no time their expressions sank. Because Zhou Xian hadn't broken through. Moreover, Zhou Xian's aura was extremely chaotic and he showed signs of qi deviation. Zhou Xian stared fixedly at Qin Tian who was charging at him. He suddenly opened his palm and a strand of sword energy suddenly flew along his arm into his palm. When they saw this strand of sword energy, everyone's expressions changed. Qin Tian even stopped and retreated almost 30 kilometers in a frenzy. Qin Tian stared fixedly at the strand of sword energy in Zhou Xian's hand, and his eyes were filled with fear. Zhou Xian took a deep breath. It was one of the 3 strands of sword energy that the woman in a plain dress had given him. Hippie said that it was his greatest trump card. He'd never used it. Even if it was extremely dangerous at times, he still hadn't used it. Because he wanted to return it to her when he met her again, and he wanted to tell her that he'd grown up. But at this moment he had no choice but to use it. He knew that even if the 4 of them joined forces, they wouldn't be able to defeat Qin Tian. Moreover, if he allowed Xiaoqi and the others to stop Qin Tian, then the 3 of them might die. He didn't want anything to happen to Xiaoqi and the others. Moreover, he didn't want Xiaoqi and the others to be beaten half to death before he utilized this strand of sword energy. He didn't want anything to happen to them at all. His younger sister had left him all along the way, so he didn't want to lose any more friends. Xian looked at Qin Tian in the distance and said softly, "Go." As soon as he said that, the strand of sword energy in his hand flew out. In the distance, Qin Tian's pupils suddenly shrank, and he suddenly put his hands together. Heaven and earth converge. As soon as he said that, the space in front of him suddenly closed, and at the same time mysterious forces continuously gathered in front of him. At this moment the strand of sword light suddenly disappeared. Qin Tian's body suddenly stiffened, and the space in front of him cracked and then disappeared. Everyone looked at Qin Tian, and there was a strand of sword energy in between Qin Tian's eyebrows. He was killed just like that. Everyone was stunned. In the distant endless starry sky, a woman in a plain dress stopped. She tilted her head slightly and with 2 fingers she gently held a strand of her hair and said softly, "Did you use it?" The strand of sword energy between Qin Tian's eyebrows suddenly vanished, and then Qin Tian's figure instantly became ethereal. Qin Tian stared fixedly at Xian. "It's only just begun." As soon as he finished speaking, his figure vanished. Everyone in the surroundings instantly heaved sighs of relief when they witnessed this scene. But right at this moment an explosion suddenly resounded in the sky and then a man walked out from there. Everyone was stunned when they saw the man. It's Qin Tian again. The expressions of everyone here instantly became extremely unsightly. Xian's face had turned gloomy as well. Meanwhile, Lian Qian's voice suddenly resounded in his mind. That person from before was only his clone, and this is his clone as well. Xian spoke solemnly. "How many clones does he have?" Lian Qian replied, "This is his second and final clone, and it possesses 30% of his strength." 30% of his strength. Xian fell silent. He clenched his right fist tightly and no one knew what he was thinking. Qin Tian walked down slowly from midair and his gaze descended onto Xian. "Do you have any other trump cards?" Xian opened his palm and another strand of sword energy appeared. Another strand of sword energy. Qin Tian glanced at Xian, and then he suddenly waved his right hand lightly. Something seemed to have been torn open in the distant sky, and it didn't take long for countless strands of black energy to surge out like tide water. Daoist Mountain Ghost and the others hurriedly retreated when they witnessed this scene. Even though the black energy from before was formidable, they were still barely able to resist it. But now the amount of black energy wasn't just countless times greater than before, it was countless times stronger as well. Endless black energy spread out from behind Qin Tian, and this black energy spread out in all directions at an extremely fast speed. Qin Tian looked at Xian and smiled. "In the void behind me, there is a space-devouring beast. This beast lives by devouring the power of the space dimension, and it can use it for its own purposes. Of course, this isn't the main point. The main point is that if you choose to kill me, this beast will devour your entire four-dimensional universe. Make your choice." Xian fell silent. At this moment, Daoist Mountain Ghost suddenly spoke in a deep voice. "Young friend, this black energy has appeared in many places in the four-dimensional universe. I can't resist it." Xian glanced around and this time he looked very far away. This black energy had already appeared in many places. Deities Templar Black-Yellow Great World and even the faraway Qingqing. Facing this endless black energy he saw the despair in many people's eyes. Deities Templars Zhou Xian, Yuan Shaodao, Northern Regions Jiangjiu, Lian Wanli Shangguanxian. Everyone could only wait for death. Only the experts here could barely resist it. However, they could only barely resist it. This was because this black gas would devour the entire four-dimensional universe. Xian turned to look at Shao Qi and the other two. Shao Qi shrugged. "I'm not afraid of death. It's just a pity that I can't go to the fifth dimension to take a look." And Lanxiu glanced at Xian but she didn't say anything. Imosia smiled slightly. "I've tried my best. Actually, I'm also a little regretful. I also want to see what kind of world the fifth dimension is like. Unfortunately, I won't have the chance." Xian shook his head. "We have to live well. Everyone has to live well too. After that, I'll take you to the fifth dimension." As his voice fell, Xian raised his head and looked into the depths of the starry sky. In the depths of the starry sky, he vaguely saw a pair of huge black eyes. After a moment of silence, the sword qi in Xian's hand suddenly soared into the sky. This strand of sword chi directly entered the depths of the starry sky. He chose to kill this space-devouring beast. Ah! In the depths of the starry sky, a mournful scream suddenly rang out. Soon all the black energy in the surroundings began to slowly disappear. Zhou Xian said softly, "Did I save the world?" In some unknown starry sky, the woman in the plain dress slowly closed her eyes. After a moment she said softly, "Back then I entered the path of destruction by exterminating all living beings. Now you used my sword chi to save all living beings." Saying this, she looked into the depths of the starry sky and said softly, "What a good karma. Brother, every cause has an effect. You are the only karma that I can't cut off." P.S. When I published it today I checked it twice. I hope there are no typos. Now every time I finish writing I check it more than twice. Chapter 850. Karma. There must be a cause and effect. To the plain-dressed woman, no matter how strong the karma was, it could not touch her. That was because her sword could sever all karma. However, she did not want to sever this karma. She also knew very well that as long as she did not cut off the relationship between her and Zhou Xian, she would have a lot of troubles ahead of her. Some troubles could not be solved with a sword. They could even ruin her sword doctrine heart. But she never regretted it. There was only one person who could let her karma touch her. There was only one person who could destroy her sword heart. There was only one person who could make her feel that living was meaningful, invincible. In this life she did not want to be defeated. Who could defeat her? Longevity? In this life she did not want to die. Who could kill her? In the starry sky, after the black gas disappeared, Zhou Xian looked at Qin Tian. He knew that things were not over yet. What Qin Tian did just now was actually to force him to hand over the sword energy. And he had to hand over the sword energy. Zhou Xian was a secular person and a selfish person. He did not have the thought of saving the world and longevity as his responsibility. He simply did not want anything to happen to his friends. And he had many friends and people he cared about. Temple and Zhuxier, and those people from Black Yellow Great World, Jiangjiu Mo Yunqi Bai Zai Shangguan etc. These people were people he cared about. As Jiangjiu had said, Zhou Xian not only had a sister but he also had many friends and people he cared about. He did not want to be a lonely swordsman. He did not want to be a swordsman who was selfish to his friends. At this moment Zhou Xian's face suddenly turned pale and the aura around him started to become chaotic. He could not suppress it anymore. Just now he had been suppressing the energy after devouring the sword energy. But now he could not suppress it anymore. He was about to break through. Zhou Xian was about to speak when Shao Qi suddenly said, "You break through first. The three of us will stop him." Zhou Xian shook his head. "Danger," Seven said. "I have no choice. You have to break through. If you do, along with your trump cards you might be able to fight him." Zhou Xian thought for a moment then nodded. He sat down cross-legged and focused on absorbing the energy in his body. Shao Qi and the other two stood in front of Zhou Xian. In the distance Qin Tian looked at Shao Qi and the other two. "The three of you are not bad. If you are willing, you can follow me to the multidimensional academy in the fifth dimension to study." Saying this he smiled faintly. "You guys might not know what entering the Myriad Dimensions Academy means." "It means that you guys," Emosia suddenly asked, "do you have any friends?" Qin Tian looked at Emosia. "Naturally." Emosia smiled and said, "Will you betray your friend?" Qin Tian thought about it then smiled and said, "I won't." Emosia faintly smiled, "We won't either." Qin Tian looked at Emosia. "You will die." Emosia softly said, "A true friend can live and die together." Qin Tian looked at Zhou Xian for a long time then nodded, "You are very loyal. However, I want to see if you are really loyal." Saying this he suddenly disappeared. When he reappeared he was already in front of Emosia. Before Emosia could react, Qin Tian's hand was already on his throat. At this moment a sword stopped behind Qin Tian. The moment Qin Tian made his move, Seven also made his move. However, she was still too slow. This doppelganger was much stronger than the previous one. Qin Tian looked at Emosia in his hand and started to exert force. Soon, Emosia's body became illusory. Qin Tian smiled and said, "You should know that I will really kill you. I'm not joking with you. However, I still want to give you a chance. As long as you nod and are willing to go to the fifth dimension with me, I can let you live." Emosia looked at Qin Tian and smiled, "I want to go to the fifth dimension to take a look. However, I don't want to kneel there." Qin Tian's hand started to exert force and a mysterious force suddenly surged into Immerse's body. Immerse suddenly raised his head and roared. At this moment his pupils actually exploded. Not only that, the bones in his body also started to slowly crack. At this moment, Seven no longer hesitated and directly slashed at Qin Tian. Qin Tian didn't even turn his head and waved his hand. Boom! A powerful force instantly sent Seven flying. At this moment, a long spear suddenly stabbed down from the top of his head. Qin Tian's right foot lightly stomped. Boom! The space above his head suddenly collapsed and the powerful force directly sent Xianxia flying. Qin Tian continued to look at Immerse. It isn't easy for people to live, especially for geniuses like you. It is even more difficult for you to reach this stage. You have to think carefully. Is it really worth it to sacrifice your life for a so-called brother? Immerse clenched his fists and his facial features twisted. On his forehead, veins popped out and he looked incomparably malevolent. Pain. At this moment he was enduring an unbearable torture. Qin Tian stared at Immerse. As long as you say the word, you can live. Not only can you live even better. Immerse suddenly roared, "Brother Yi, take good care of my clansmen." As his voice faded, his body suddenly started burning. Burning his soul to self-destruct. Qin Tian narrowed his eyes. At this moment a voice came from the side, "Let him go." Qin Tian turned to look at the nearby Yi Xian. Yi Xian stared deadly at Qin Tian. He opened his palm and the prison pagoda appeared in his hand. "Let him go, this is for you." Qin Tian laughed, "Even if you don't give it to me, I can take it." Yi Xian said, "You should know that it has already recognized me as its master. If my brother dies, I will detonate it. I will do what I say." Qin Tian looked at Yi Xian but he didn't say anything. At this moment Immerse was completely burning. At most a few breaths of time he would completely disappear. Yi Xian suddenly roared. The prison pagoda appeared between his eyebrows. In the next moment the prison pagoda started shaking. Seeing this, Qin Tian squinted his eyes. His right hand lightly exerted strength and a force shattered the flames around Immerse. However, he was still a bit too slow. At this moment, Immerse's body completely disappeared, leaving only his soul. Moreover, this soul was extremely ethereal, as if it could disappear at any moment. Qin Tian looked at Yi Xian. "Give it to me." Yi Xian stared deadly at Qin Tian. With a point of his finger, the prison pagoda flew right in front of Qin Tian. Qin Tian let go. The moment he let go of Immerse, his pupils suddenly shrank. He saw Yi Xian suddenly roar, "Old dog, my brother isn't someone you can touch." As his voice faded, a sword aura suddenly flew out of his hand. Sword aura again. Yi Xian originally didn't want to use this sword aura because it truly was his last trump card. He wanted to save it for a critical moment, but now, seeing Immerse's body destroyed, he didn't want to think about anything else. Seeing this, Qin Tian's expression changed greatly. He frantically retreated, but the sword aura was even faster, instantly piercing through his forehead. Qin Tian's body instantly became ethereal. Qin Tian looked at Yi Xian. He was just about to speak when a sword suddenly flew out of Yi Xian's hand. This flying sword sliced through Qin Tian's throat. Qin Tian instantly disappeared. At this moment Yi Xian's mouth spat out a mouthful of essence blood. Just now he was at a critical moment, but seeing Immerse almost be forced to burn her soul and self-destruct, he had to forcefully stop. Now he was starting to suffer the backlash. Yi Xian didn't care about his body. He looked at Immerse. Right now, Immerse's body was extremely ethereal, as if it could disappear at any moment. At this moment Little Soul's voice suddenly rang out, "Young master, I can save him." Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Hurry." As he spoke he quickly took out the soul-suppressing sword. Little Soul directly absorbed Immerse into the sword. Little Soul said, "His soul is very weak. It will take a period of time to recover." Yi Xian breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. He looked up at the horizon. "Brother Mo, don't worry. I will take you to the 5th dimension. Let's go there together." After saying that, he immediately sat down cross-legged. Breakthrough. He had to break through as soon as possible because he knew that things weren't over yet. Everyone present knew that things weren't over yet. Although the 5th dimension barrier had been broken, at the end of their line of sight was pitch black. In that pitch black space everyone could feel a powerful force. a force from the fifth dimension. And Lanxiao and Xiaoqi walked to Yi Xian's side. Xiaoqi looked up at the depths of the starry sky and softly said, "Perhaps the fifth dimension barrier isn't a bad thing." The fourth dimension was naturally much weaker than the fifth dimension. Under such circumstances, if the two universes didn't have any restrictions, the fourth dimension would really be slaughtered by others. Just like just now, if it weren't for Yi Xian's sword light, the fourth dimension would probably have been destroyed in a day. But now that the restrictions were gone, the fate of the fourth dimension was in the hands of the experts of the fifth dimension. At this time, not far away, a middle-aged man suddenly said, "I'll try." As he spoke, he suddenly soared into the sky. Obviously, he still wanted to go to the fifth dimension. This was also normal. After all, the restrictions had been broken and the fifth dimension was close at hand. How could he not be tempted? However, before he could approach that area, a white light directly blasted his body. Boom! The middle-aged man's body directly turned to ashes. Seeing this scene, everyone's expression immediately sank. The people of the fifth dimension didn't want the experts of the fourth dimension to go up. Everyone looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian's aura was getting stronger and stronger. A breakthrough was imminent. At this time, Lian Qian suddenly appeared beside Yi Xian. She glanced at the people present and then raised her head to look at the depths of the starry sky. She frowned slightly. After a while, Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian. She just looked at Yi Xian silently. At this time, Xiaoqi walked to Lian Qian's side and softly said, "What's wrong?" Lian Qian shook her head. "Originally, I hoped that he would become stronger before going to the fifth dimension. Unfortunately, I didn't expect that the people above wouldn't give him any chance." As she spoke, she shook her head again. "He won't survive. Can be said that he is now the public enemy of the fifth dimension. The people of the fourth dimension only know that Xiao Ta can go to the fifth dimension. They don't know the real use of this pagoda. But the people of the fifth dimension know the real use of this pagoda. For this pagoda they will risk their lives." Xiaoqi was silent. At this time, Lian Qian said again, "If I'm not wrong, they might have already made a move on that plain-dressed woman. Because this time, not a single expert from the Myriad Dimensions Academy came. They must be targeting that plain-dressed woman." Chapter 851. Against the plain-dressed woman. Why were the experts of the fifth dimension unable to obtain the World Prison Pagoda? The reason was because of the plain-dressed woman. She was the one who had been obstructing the experts of the fifth dimension. Without her, Yi Xian would not have been able to live until now. It could be said that the plain-dressed woman was their greatest enemy. And they were very clear that this woman was not easy to kill because they had already failed once. On the battlefield, Lian Qian's expression was gloomy the entire time. Xiaoqi and the rest simply did not know the situation of the fifth dimension. The people of that universe could not be compared to the people of the fourth dimension. Especially the Myriad Dimensions Academy. In the past, the Myriad Dimensions Academy could be said to be the most powerful force in the entire fifth dimension. Naturally, the members of the Myriad Dimensions Academy were all students and did not participate in worldly affairs. Because of this, the status of the Myriad Dimensions Academy in the fifth dimension was very high. She knew that the plain-dressed woman was very strong, but the Myriad Dimensions Academy was not weak either. Especially Qin Tian and that female teacher. Their strength could only be described as unfathomable. Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian with worry in her eyes. She naturally did not want anything to happen to Yi Xian. Her goal was to find her master, and this World Prison Pagoda was the key to finding her master. And if this World Prison Pagoda fell into Qin Tian's hands, would Qin Tian go and find her master? If it was a long time ago, he might have. But now she was very clear that Qin Tian definitely would not, because power was very tempting. Qin Tian was now the master of the Myriad Dimensions Academy, so he would not go and find his master. Moreover, if the World Prison Pagoda fell into Qin Tian's hands, the two sisters would once again be imprisoned in the pagoda. This was because Qin Tian would definitely not give up on their Dao laws. If they gathered their Dao laws, their might would be extremely terrifying. One must know that in the past, when the two sisters joined forces with the World Prison Pagoda, they fought against the three swordsmen. Although they lost, it was not because they and the World Prison Pagoda were weak, but because the three swordsmen were too strong. Therefore, if the World Prison Pagoda fell into Qin Tian's hands, it would be difficult for them to escape their fate. When they had followed the Prophet had never treated them as subordinates. But if they fell into the hands of Qin Tian? Thinking of this, Lian Qian opened her palm and the world prison pagoda suddenly appeared in her palm. Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian beside her. I'll buy you some time. Not much, maybe 2 or 3 months. As her voice fell, Lian Qian suddenly transformed into a beam of white light and shot up into the sky. Very quickly she arrived in front of the black region. She looked at the black region in front of her, then at the world prison pagoda in her hands. She slowly closed her eyes. Haven't you always been curious about what Dao law I am? Below, Yi Xian raised his head and looked at Lian Qian. The corners of Lian Qian's mouth lifted slightly. You'll know soon enough. With that she suddenly opened her eyes. In the name of the pagoda, seal. The world prison pagoda in her hands trembled violently. In the next moment, countless golden runes suddenly flew out of Lian Qian's body. Very quickly, these golden runes were like tiny butterflies that flew towards the black region. Soon these golden runes formed a swastika character. And at this moment, a giant finger suddenly descended from the black region. This giant finger directly bombarded the swastika character. Boom! The swastika character trembled violently, but it did not shatter. On the contrary, the giant finger directly exploded. However, behind this giant finger, a giant black hand suddenly stretched out. Below, Lian Qian slowly closed her eyes. Seal the heavens and earth. As her voice fell, she suddenly opened her eyes. From within her body, a golden pillar of light suddenly shot up into the sky. This golden pillar of light directly entered the swastika character. The swastika character trembled violently and directly imprinted itself into the black region. Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Hall. Ancestors above, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From this moment onwards, Yi Xian's position as crown prince is removed. Yi Lang will succeed him. The one who spoke was an old man dressed in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. And on both sides were the Yi clan's elders. Why? At this moment, a somewhat timid voice suddenly rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone looked over and saw a little girl standing at the door. The little girl was about 12 or 13 years old. Her 2 small hands were tightly gripping the corners of her skirt. Her face was sickly pale and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of timidity in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling. She was Yi Xian's younger sister. This time, when she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian from his position, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is a crown prince. Why did you remove his title for no reason? The great elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. This is a matter of the clan. What are you interrupting? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid and did not dare to look at the great elder. However, she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed again to the elders on both sides. Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan over the mining rights at Nanshan. He is fighting with his life on the line for the clan. It is unknown whether he is alive or dead. Yet the clan is using a groundless excuse to remove his title. This is really unfair. Impudent. The great elder suddenly raged. Whether he is removed or not, it is not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this moment, the new crown prince Yi Lang suddenly laughed. You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The great elder said coldly, then flog 30 times. Soon 2 guards of the Yi clan rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years. Even now he is fighting with his life on the line for the clan. The clan is so unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to show off. The guard sneered, Young master Yi Lang inherits the title of crown prince. What are you yelling about? With that he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp sound of the slap was heard. The right side of Yi Ling's face instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry. She just covered her cheek with her hand. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled. What's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed. I'm Zhang Mu. Greetings, Crown Prince. Yi Lang nodded. You're not bad. After I become the Crown Prince, I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He hurriedly bowed deeply. I'm willing to go through fire and water for the crown prince. Yilang nodded slightly. Drag him away. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't show any mercy. Do you understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yilang. When he saw the murderous intent in Yilang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yiling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped when he saw something. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking toward the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe. The robe was tattered and covered in blood. This young man was Zhou Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Zhou Xian, Yilang's lips curled into a sinister smile. Inside the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes, his face dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Zhou Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yiling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Zhou Xian, his face changed. He hurriedly looked at Yilang and was about to speak. At this time, Zhou Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Zhou Xian's fist landed on his face. Ping! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness and he stumbled and fell. However, Yiling did not stop there. He charged at Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yilang suddenly roared, Zhou Xian, he's my man. How dare you? Zhou Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yilang's face turned ugly. Zhou Xian looked up at him and said, Your man? As he spoke, he stepped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, Prince, save me. Zhou Xian ignored Zhang Mu and walked to Yiling's side. Seeing Yiling's appearance, Zhou Xian felt as though his heart was being cut by a knife. He clenched his fists and his entire body trembled. When Yiling saw Zhou Xian, her tears flowed. Brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Zhou Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Ping! Qingqing Yi Clan Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Zhou Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Zhou Xian's position as prince shall be removed, and Yilang shall take over. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yilang. On both sides were the elders of the Yi clan. Why? At this time, a timid voice rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor and she looked a little weak. There was even a hint of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yiling and she was Zhou Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Zhou Xian from his position, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yiling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yiling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall, and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother Zhou Xian is a prince. Why did you remove him for no reason? The great elder looked at Yiling coldly. This is a matter of the clan, why are you interrupting? Leave. Yiling was obviously afraid and did not dare to look directly at the great elder. However, she did not leave and instead mustered up her courage to enter the ancestral hall. She bowed again to the elders on both sides. Elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan over the mining rights at Nanshan. He is fighting for the clan and his life is uncertain. Yet the clan is using a groundless excuse to remove him from his position. This is really unfair. Impudent. The great elder suddenly raged. Whether he is removed or not, it is not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new prince Yilang suddenly laughed. You should be flogged 30 times as a warning. The great elder coldly replied, Then flog 30 times. Soon 2 guards of the Yi clan rushed in. Yiling clenched her fists and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years and even now he is fighting for the clan. The clan is so unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new prince Yilang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered, Young Master Yilang is the heir and it is the wish of everyone. What are you shouting about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yiling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded and the right side of Yiling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry and only held her cheek tightly. Yilang looked at the guard and smiled. "What's your name?" The guard hurriedly bowed. "Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the prince." Yilang nodded. "You're not bad. After I become the prince I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed and hurriedly bowed. This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the prince, even if it means death. Yilang nodded. "Drag him out. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't show mercy, understand?" Zhang Mu glanced at Yilang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yilang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yiling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu seemed to see something and suddenly stopped. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe and the robe was tattered and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Zhou Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Zhou Xian, Yilang's lips curled into a sinister smile. Inside the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Zhou Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yiling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Zhou Xian, his face changed. He hurriedly looked at Yilang and was about to speak, when Zhou Xian suddenly appeared in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Zhou Xian's fist landed on his face. Ping! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness and he stumbled and fell. However, Yiling did not stop there and charged towards Zhang Mu once more. At this time, Yilang suddenly roared, "Zhou Xian, he's my man, how dare you!" Zhou Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yilang's face turned ugly. Zhou Xian looked up at him and snarled, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stepped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Zhou Xian did not care about Zhang Mu as he walked to Yiling's side. Seeing Yiling's state, Zhou Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists and his entire body trembled. When Yiling saw Zhou Xian, her tears flowed. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Zhou Xian's expression turned savage and in the next instant he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Ping! Chapter 852. I beg you to be stronger. Hearing the woman's words, the smile on Qin Tian's face suddenly disappeared. The woman was arrogant, supercilious, possibly both, but his intuition told him that the woman in front of him was a bit stronger than they had expected. Of course, at this moment he had no way of retreating. Moreover, there was no need for him to do so. All these years, what had Qin Tian not seen before? How could he retreat just because of one sentence from the woman in front of him? Of course, facing the woman in front of him, he was even more cautious. At this time, the woman in the distance suddenly said, "Start your performance?" Qin Tian looked at the woman in the plain dress. The woman in the plain dress had a calm expression. In her limpid eyes, there was not a trace of ripple. This was a special person. Qin Tian chuckled. "To be honest, you surprised many of us because we never thought that a strong person like you would appear in the four-dimensional universe." The woman in the plain dress looked at Qin Tian. "As a person from the five-dimensional universe, do you have a sense of superiority?" Qin Tian laughed. "No, because we never compare ourselves with you four-dimensional people." Speaking up to here, he suddenly paused and then said, "Speaking of which, it seems that we do have a sense of superiority. However, isn't this normal? For example, when you face a race that is more backward than you, don't you also have a sense of superiority?" The woman in the plain dress said, "Superiority comes from inferiority. Finding a sense of superiority from those who are weaker than you is incompetent." Qin Tian looked at the woman in the plain dress. "In front of me, don't you also have a sense of superiority? What, do you also have inferiority and are incompetent?" The corner of the woman's mouth slightly raised. "Superiority? Have you ever seen a person have a sense of superiority when facing an ant?" Hearing this, Qin Tian narrowed his eyes. "Ant?" The woman in the plain dress in front of him actually treated him as an ant. Qin Tian laughed. He laughed somewhat crazily. "In this life, no one has ever said that I am as weak as an ant. You are the first." The plain-dressed woman slowly walked towards Qin Tian. If you don't start your performance, then you will lose this chance. Qin Tian looked at the plain-dressed woman and said with a smile, "Come, let me see exactly how strong you are." As soon as he finished speaking, his palm suddenly opened, and a thick ancient book suddenly appeared in his hand. Qin Tian looked at the woman in the plain dress and smiled. "Do you dare to enter the book and fight with us?" The woman in the plain dress looked at the ancient book. The title of the book was Book Realm. The plainly dressed woman nodded. "All right." As soon as she finished speaking, she transformed into a ray of sword light and entered the book. The Book Realm. Qin Tian smiled faintly and entered the world of books. The woman in the plain dress appeared in a huge study room. As far as the eye could see, it was densely packed with bookshelves with no end in sight. At this moment, Qin Tian appeared not too far away from the woman in the plain dress. He looked at the woman in the plain dress and smiled. Book realm with books as the boundary. This was created by teacher many years ago, and it can be used to suppress another's realm through books. Moreover, within this world all divine arts can't be used. As soon as he finished speaking, the books on the surrounding bookshelves suddenly flipped open page by page. Subsequently, countless tiny words flew out from the books, and these words directly arrived above the woman in the plain dress. Subsequently, a mysterious force directly enveloped the woman in the plain dress. Suppress one's realm. However, the woman in the plain dress's expression was extremely calm. Realm? That was a set of rules that she had once set, and she was no longer within the scope of the rules. To put it simply, she had already jumped out of the scope of realm. At this moment, 4 old men suddenly appeared around the woman in the plain dress. The 4 old men were all dressed in white robes, and each of them held a thick black ancient book in their hands. The 4 of them stared at the woman in the plain dress, and they incessantly muttered something. Very soon, the black ancient book in their hands suddenly flipped open, and blood-red words flew out from the book. These words were like 4 threads that converged towards the woman in the plain dress from 4 directions. These words contained an extremely powerful force, and it could be said that if these words appeared in the outside world, they could easily destroy a piece of the starry sky. And at this moment these words were endless. This time the myriad-dimensional academy was serious. They didn't dare to be careless. After all, they had already failed before. Therefore they were extremely cautious towards the woman in the plain dress. However, these words stopped half a zhang away from the woman in the plain dress. Seeing this scene, Qin Tian, who was not far away, narrowed his eyes, and the 4 old men's expressions became even more solemn. At this moment, Qin Tian suddenly said, "Kill." As soon as he said that, the space around the woman in the plain dress suddenly split open, and then 4 black chains formed by countless black words tore through the air. At the top of these 4 chains were 4 extremely hideous demon beasts. These demon beasts were shaped like wolves, and they had extremely long fangs. Their eyes were blood red, and they looked like they were about to devour someone. The woman in the plain dress glanced at the 4 demon beasts and shook her head. There was unconcealable disappointment in her eyes. "You're wasting my time." As soon as she finished speaking, she lightly snapped her fingers. A ray of sword light appeared. Chi 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 chi. The 4 demon beasts directly stopped on the spot. Very soon the 4 demon beasts became illusory and disappeared. At the same time, the eyes of the 4 old men nearby were wide open. There was fear in their eyes, and there was a sword mark on their throats. Instant kill. Not far away, Qin Tian stared at the woman in the plain dress. At this moment his fists were already clenched tightly. The woman in the plain dress looked around and said softly, "This so-called book realm is barely passable. At least Master's idea is very interesting. As for power..." At this point she looked at Qin Tian. "You want to use this thing to kill me? May I ask, are you retarded?" Qin Tian suddenly smiled. "Don't worry, there's more." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly formed a seal with both hands, and a moment later he suddenly roared. "Destroy." Boom. A bookshelf suddenly exploded behind Qin Tian, and then a dark red "destroy" character floated out. The moment this "destroy" character appeared, the entire book realm actually trembled slightly. It was too powerful. The woman in the plain dress looked at the "destroy" character. At this moment Qin Tian suddenly roared. "Go." However, the "destroy" character only trembled and did not move. Qin Tian was stunned. What's going on? At this moment the woman in the plain dress suddenly said, "Come here." The destroy character hesitated for a moment before it directly floated to the woman in the plain dress. It was trembling. Fear. Seeing this scene, Qin Tian's hands began to tremble. The woman in the plain dress glanced at the destroy character in front of her. A character has cultivated a spirit, and it is an extreme destruction spirit. This is rare. I will find a new master for you. How about it? The destroy character trembled slightly. Moved. The woman in the plain dress was expressionless. Not willing. The destroy character suddenly trembled violently. The woman in the plain dress nodded. It's good that you are willing. Follow him well, and in the future I will give you a good fortune. After saying that, she directly kept the destroy character. Then she looked at Qin Tian. Are there any other treasures? Qin Tian stared at the woman in the plain dress. Why? The woman in the plain dress said, You mean this character has a spirit? Qin Tian said, Yes. The woman in the plain dress smiled. Because it is smarter than you. As she said that, she suddenly looked behind Qin Tian to the right. She slightly frowned, and with a point of her finger, a ray of sword light directly slashed at the bookshelf. Boom! A powerful force burst forth from the bookshelf. Soon a golden word, break, floated out. The woman in the plain dress looked at the golden destroy character and said, Come here. The destroy character trembled slightly, but it did not go over. The woman in the plain dress squinted her eyes, and a ray of sword light flew out from her eyes. In the distance, the destroy character directly exploded and turned into ashes. Seeing this scene, Qin Tian, who was not far away, had a face full of shock. You. As for the woman in the plain dress, the blood-red destroy character in her hand, it was trembling in fear. The woman in the plain dress looked at Qin Tian, and Qin Tian's body gradually became illusory. Doppelganger. This was also his doppelganger. His main body did not come down, and he did not dare to come down because his main body still needed to guard the Myriad Dimensions Academy. The woman in the plain dress suddenly said, Originally, the life and death of this four-dimensional universe had nothing to do with me. However, since my brother chose to save this four-dimensional universe, then... As she said that, she walked in front of Qin Tian and looked at Qin Tian. From now on, this four-dimensional universe is under my protection. Go back and tell the people of the fifth dimension that you can come at me. If you use 2 moves, it will be my loss. After saying that, she disappeared, and the book realm disappeared together with her. In the battlefield, Qin Tian was silent, and his body became more and more illusory. He knew that they had seriously underestimated the woman's strength. But here came the question. Just how strong was she? Even the book realm left by his teacher could not do anything to this woman. How strong was she? There was no answer. Soon Qin Tian completely disappeared. In the starry sky, the woman in the plain dress looked at the thick book realm in her hand. Find him and follow him. In the future I will give you a fortune. The book realm slightly trembled, then turned into a ray of black light and disappeared into the horizon. Looking at the book realm at the end of the starry sky, the woman in the plain dress was silent for a moment, then she turned and left. In the starry sky, the woman in the plain dress slowly walked. Her figure became smaller and smaller at the end of the starry sky, looking somewhat lonely. In a certain academy, in a pavilion, a middle-aged man suddenly opened his eyes. It was not a doppelganger but his main body. Qin Tian got up and walked to the side. He lowered his head and looked at the pool in front of him. After a moment he smiled. Do you think I'm scared? Even my teacher didn't dare to call himself invincible in the past. What ability do you have? As he said that, he slowly closed his eyes. Don't you want to fight? Then I will have a good fight with you. Pass down the order to arrest Zhou Xian. Chapter 853. The Four-Dimensional Universe. After Zhou Xian left the dual realm sky, he returned to the northern region. Zhou Xian immediately went to the Moke clan. The Moke clan had now moved to Tianjiang City. They had their own territory in Tianjiang City. The Moke clan was developing well and was considered a tyrant in Tianjiang City. Seeing Zhou Xian, the great elder of the Moke clan quickly came out and bowed. King Yi. Zhou Xian said softly, Senior, you don't have to be so polite. Take me to a quiet place. The great elder nodded. Follow me, King Yi. Soon the great elder brought Zhou Xian to a hall in the Moke clan. There was only Zhou Xian and him in the hall. Yi Xian opened his palm and the soul-suppressing sword appeared in his hand. The soul-suppressing sword trembled slightly and Immerse's soul floated out. At this moment, Immerse's soul had condensed a lot and was much stronger than before. Seeing Yi Xian, Immerse smiled. Did you win? Yi Xian nodded. For the time being. Immerse said softly. For the time being, Yi Xian said. Brother Immerse, don't worry about this for now. Your priority now is to rebuild your body as soon as possible. Immerse nodded. All right. Careful. Yi Xian patted Immerse's shoulder lightly and turned to leave. After Yi Xian left, the great elder said in a deep voice, It's very serious, right? Immerse nodded. The great elder hesitated for a moment and said, You are the hope of our clan. Immerse said softly, I know. But sometimes there are many things that have to be done. Saying this, he looked at the great elder. Uncle, I know what you are thinking. But have you ever thought about the reason why our Moke clan could come this far? The great elder said, Because of King Yi. Immerse nodded. The reason our clansmen have a place to live is because of Brother Yi. As for us, we shouldn't only think about our own benefits. Brother Yi falls. When the nest is overturned, how can the eggs remain intact? The grand elder shook his head. Uncle, I was being selfish. Immerse nodded slightly and said softly, This time my physical body being destroyed is not entirely a bad thing. The great elder hurriedly said, What's wrong? Immerse slowly closed his eyes. At this moment, a shadow suddenly appeared above his soul. Seeing this scene, the grand elder was stunned for a moment before saying in shock, This is the ancestor. After Yi Xian left the Moke clan, he returned to Tianjiang City. In a large hall, Yi Xian gathered the experts of the Black-Yellow Great World. The Xianyuan clan patriarch, the Black-Yellow Master, and the others were all present. Yi Xian looked at the crowd. I believe everyone has heard about the dual realm sky. That's right, now that the fifth dimension's restriction has been lifted, people from the fourth dimension can go to the fifth dimension, and experts from the fifth dimension should be able to come to the fourth dimension. Hearing this, the people present were a little excited. The fifth dimension. Not only did the experts from the dual realm sky want to go to the fifth dimension, but the experts from the Black-Yellow Great World also wanted to go to the fifth dimension. That was a whole new universe. Yi Xian glanced at the crowd. Everyone, it is best to temporarily give up on the idea of going to the fifth dimension because they are not friendly. The crowd was silent. Yi Xian said again, The fifth dimension is not friendly. At this moment, the Black-Yellow Master suddenly said, King Yi, was the black gas from before caused by the fifth dimension? Yi Xian nodded. Hearing this, the Black-Yellow Master's face darkened. Do they want to destroy our fourth dimension? Yi Xian said in a low voice. They did have this idea before. The Black-Yellow Master looked at Yi Xian. King Yi, did you stop them? Yi Xian nodded. The Black-Yellow Master looked deeply at Yi Xian. King Ye's strength is unfathomable. The crowd also looked at Yi Xian. They had to admit that the current Yi Xian was becoming more and more unfathomable. Yi Xian said, Today I called everyone here to tell you about the current situation between our fourth dimension and the fifth dimension. I believe everyone knows that the strength of our fourth dimension is definitely weaker than that of the fifth dimension. Therefore, now that the fifth dimension's restriction has been lifted, it is not a good thing for us. Also, I hope that everyone can understand one thing. Don't even think about going to the fifth dimension. If you go now, you will be sending yourself to death. Of course, if anyone wants to go, I won't stop you. He knew that going to the fifth dimension was an irresistible temptation for many people. If he forcefully stopped them, some people might think that he was obstructing their future. No one in the hall spoke. Yi Xian continued. Now that the fifth dimension's restriction has been lifted, the experts of the fifth dimension may enter the fourth dimension at any time. Therefore, our current situation is not particularly good. Especially now, the people of the Black-Yellow Great World may be unstable. At this time, we need everyone to work together to stabilize the situation. We can't be the first to panic before others come. The Black-Yellow Master nodded. What King Yi said makes sense. We can't be the first to panic. Yi Xian said, We will be very busy from now on. Everyone please leave. The crowd in the hall bowed slightly to Yi Xian and then left. However, the Black-Yellow Master did not leave. The Black-Yellow Master walked in front of Yi Xian and looked at Yi Xian. If they really want to destroy our fourth dimension, will we be able to resist? Yi Xian was silent. This was because he could not answer this question. Right now he was only facing the Myriad Dimensions Academy. However, he was very clear that the Myriad Dimensions Academy was not the only one in the fifth dimension. There were definitely countless other forces, and these forces were very likely to become his enemies. Yi Xian said softly, I don't know. However, don't worry. If they only target me, Yi Xian will bear all the consequences. I will not implicate the fourth dimension. The black-yellow master was silent. She could see things further. She knew that there was only one possibility for the fifth dimension to not plunder or conquer the fifth dimension. They had come for the treasure of the fifth dimension. Simply put, the target of the experts of the fifth dimension should be Yi Xian, not the entire fourth dimension. Of course, she did not know that if not for Yi Xian being in the fourth dimension, the fourth dimension would have long ceased to exist. After a while, the black-yellow master left. In the palace, Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. Breakthrough. After he had swallowed Qin Tian's sword, he had already absorbed the entire sword's power. He did not know what sword it was, but he had to say that it was really a great supplement. Now he needed some time to comprehend it. What was life-breaking? In the palace, Yi Xian was deep in thought. Outside the palace, in a certain courtyard, there were two women sitting in front of a stone table. They were Xianxia and Xiaoqi. Beside them, there was a woman leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. She had a blade of grass in her mouth. Lian Wanli. Now the most monstrous geniuses of the northern region's younger generation, other than Immerse and Yi Xian, were all here. Xiaoqi picked up the teacup on the stone table and took a sip. Then she said, What do you think? And Xianxia did not speak. Lian Wanli shrugged his shoulders. I can. What do you think? Those fellows from the fifth dimension obviously want little Ye's life. And Xianxia nodded. Not only do they want to seize the treasure, they want to kill him. Xiaoqi placed down the teacup and said softly, I think that we can't just sit there and wait for death. At the side, Lian Wanli's brows rose up. You want to counterattack? Xiaoqi said indifferently, Why not? And Xianxia suddenly said, Sure. Xiaoqi glanced in the direction of Yi Xian's room. He has quite a lot of fortuitous encounters and is getting stronger and stronger. If we follow by his side, the gap between us will get bigger and bigger. I don't want to look up to him in the future. As she spoke, she looked at Lian Wanli and Xianxia. Let's go? The corners of Lian Wanli's mouth curled up. That is exactly what I want. Xiaoqi looked at Xianxia. Xianxia said, Sure. Xiaoqi said, Let's go. Lian Wanli suddenly said, Do you want to say goodbye? Xiaoqi said indifferently, There is no need. Let's go. As soon as she finished speaking, she walked towards the distance. Xianxia glanced in the direction of Yi Xian and then followed. Lian Wanli shrugged. Let's go then. Very quickly, the three girls vanished into the distance. They left in a carefree manner and didn't bid farewell to anyone. On the city wall, Xianxia and Jiangjiu looked at the three girls who vanished into the horizon. Jiangjiu said softly, I envy them. Xianxia nodded. The talents of Xiaoqi and the other two weren't weaker than Yi Xian at all. Before this, they had always been by Yi Xian's side. It could be said that their light was overshadowed by Yi Xian. If one disregarded Yi Xian, one would realize that they were actually very outstanding. Now the three of them decided to go on their own. Obviously, they didn't want to be affected by Yi Xian anymore. Contrast. Simply speaking, the three of them didn't want to be Yi Xian's contrast. At this time, Jiangjiu chuckled. They can leave, but we can't, and we don't dare to leave. Now the northern region needed her and Xianxia very much. Because the entire black-yellow Great World's affairs were handled by her and Xianxia, and Yi Xian was completely a hands-off shopkeeper. If they left, Yi Xian would definitely be badly battered. Moreover, the two of them didn't have the strength of Xiaoqi and the other two. If they left the black-yellow Great World, it would be very dangerous, not to mention going to the fifth dimension. At this time, Xianxia suddenly said, Do you want to go to the fifth dimension to have a look? Jiangjiu smiled. Of course. Fifth dimension. As she spoke, she looked up at the end of the horizon and said softly, I don't know if I have the chance to go in this life. Xianxia was about to speak, but at this moment the two girls suddenly disappeared. Soon the two girls appeared in front of a large hall. And in front of the hall stood a man. It was Yi Xian. Jiangjiu quickly walked in front of Yi Xian and said softly, You broke through? Yi Xian shook his head. This time he wasn't able to break through to the life-breaking realm. Just a little bit more. Jiang Jiu nodded slightly. No rush, take your time. Yi Xian said softly, I'm going out for a while. I'll have to trouble you here. Jiang Jiu looked at Yi Xian. Where are you going? Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. To find help. After saying that, he directly turned into a sword light and disappeared at the end of the horizon. In the same place, Jiang Jiu said softly, Say, who do you think he's going to find? P.S. Recently the weather has been getting colder and colder. If you're not careful you'll catch a cold. Brothers, make sure to keep warm.